A very good morning to you all on this chilly, foggy Canberra morning, and hello to our online audience. I hope it is sunnier where you are. My name is Anna Maria Arabia. I'm the Chief Executive here at the Australian Academy of Science, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Shine Dome today and to MC proceedings over the course of the day. This is a terrific event and a collaboration between the Academy and the Department of Defence, who I'd like to thank from the onset for their collaboration and goodwill in engaging not just with the Academy but with the research sector more broadly. And to help shape this conference, this gathering, so that we can discuss research security in Australia and have available to the research sector in particular information around the defence export controls and recent changes to legislation and regulation. To begin, I'd like to pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Ngunnawal people and their elders past and present, and indeed to traditional owners and elders past and present on all of the lands where the Academy works and operates and where its fellows work and operate. May I extend a particular welcome to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the audience today or online. Thank you for being with us. We'll begin today's event with a welcome address by Professor Ivan Marusic, who is the Vice President of the Australian Academy of Science, followed by some context setting by Dr. Nigel McGinty. You'll also hear from Emily Hall and Rosanna Domenici on changes to Australia's defence export controls. I strongly encourage you to ask questions. This is an opportunity for all of those questions that might be in your mind or any uncertainties you might have to be clarified. We'll then take a break for morning tea. We ask that you don't bring food and drink into the theatre. This wonderful Shine Dome is many things, but it is also heritage listed, and you are sitting on seats whose fabric is rare and can't be replaced. Well, it can be, but not with the original fabric. We do strive very hard to be custodians of this very beautiful place. We'll resume after morning tea with a panel discussion, followed by Q&A with panellists from government and research on the impact of national security and scientific research and how Australia can strengthen and diversify its international scientific collaborations while managing security risks. For our online audience, please submit your questions via the QR code that will be up on the screen in just a moment. From the onset, may I please thank Lauren Sullivan from the Academy of Science and the Academy's policy team and our colleagues from the Department of Defence for pulling together such a rich program today, and an important one in times of change, both in research, defence and the national security environment that we all operate in. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Professor Ivan Marusic, Vice President of the Academy of Science and Secretary for Physical Sciences, to give a welcome address. Ivan is a physicist, an engineer, the Redmond Barry Distinguished Professor and Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Research and Infrastructure at the University of Melbourne, where he's responsible for strategy, policy and advice relating to research infrastructure. Thank you for being with us, Ivan, online. Over to you.
Thank you, Anna Maria. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin by warmly welcoming you to the Shine Dome, the home of the Australian Academy of Science, including those of you who are joining in via the live stream. The Academy has a strong history of convening and facilitating dialogue on important issues for Australia's science system. It is fantastic to have representatives from across the science system join us today, including those from universities, research organisations, industry, peak bodies and government, to hear about the changes to Australia's defence export controls framework and to engage in a guided panel discussion and Q&A on research and national security. These conversations are timely and important, given how our world is changing. Scientific capability and the ability to innovate are powerful assets that have become central to state power and sovereignty. Competition between major powers and geopolitical interests is shaping who we choose to collaborate with and in what areas. There is renewed awareness of a security dimension to research and international collaborations. In recent years, we have witnessed the impact of these pressures. For example, vaccine nationalism in response to limited supply of COVID-19 vaccinations, cybersecurity attacks on important infrastructure, and the rapid development of technologies such as AI, which offer exciting new possibilities, but also bring new risks that we need to mitigate. The AUKUS partnership presents collaboration opportunities for Australian science that may involve reconsidering some of the architecture of our research system. These examples show that Australian science and building our science capability are critical in securing the prosperity of our nation and the wider Indo-Pacific region. In November last year, the Academy held a symposium titled International Scientific Collaborations in a Contested World. It convened scientists, national security experts, government officials, and researchers for a dialogue about how to strike the right balance between national security and research openness in the context of a complex and challenging geopolitical landscape. It is important to continue this discussion to get this balance right, which is why the Academy is hosting this event today, essentially to continue forging a mutual understanding of the research and national security challenge we face and raise awareness of the frameworks designed to protect Australia's interests so that we can achieve compliance and take a common sense approach. At the symposium, we heard strong support for strengthening multilateral scientific engagement, exchanging talent and knowledge whilst minimising risk. Ongoing global scientific collaborations serve Australia's national interests. They allow us to apply knowledge created through global scientific endeavour to uniquely Australian challenges. This involves not only the academic research community, but also industry R&D, which applies scientific knowledge to innovate, solve problems, and deliver benefit to Australia's economy and communities. We all know that exciting innovations come from sharing ideas, both locally and with overseas colleagues. Scientific cooperation and capability are also valuable diplomatic assets, shaping our relationships with other nations and promoting stability, building trust, mutual understanding, and deterring conflict. The negotiation of the Antarctic Treaty in the lead up to 1959 is a good example of scientific collaboration, despite the deterioration of politics regarding dual-use technologies and goods. The symposium discussed a range of risks that researchers face, including espionage, foreign interference, unwanted technology transfer, cyber attacks, and theft of intellectual property. It's important to realise that this does not just impact defence scientists or researchers who work on certain technologies. That is why we've brought together a panel of speakers today who will be able to provide perspectives on some of these areas. These challenges require cultural change to be risk-aware. When risks are managed, we can achieve greater outcomes through international collaboration while maintaining security needs. But our responses need to be proportional to the risk and grounded in evidence rather than based on fear or ideology. As researchers, we have a responsibility to understand the potential applications of our research and the technologies we use and develop, be security aware, practice data security, and exercise due diligence to address risks. Governments have a responsibility to consider unintended consequences, measure the impact of the security measures on the research system, and consider how compliance and regulatory burdens are reflected in research funding. Australia's Defence Export Controls Act was reviewed in 2023, and amendments were made to align with our partners under the AUKUS agreement. The Defence Trade Controls Amendment Act 2024 was passed by Parliament in March this year. From the Academy's perspective, it was absolutely vital to ensure that in the pursuit of streamlined coordination and technology development with AUKUS partners, we did not introduce dire consequences for Australia's international research collaborations with other nations. The most significant amendment to the new bill that the Academy argued for was the inclusion of an exemption for fundamental research in the legislation. Inclusion of this exemption and definition in the legislation helps to provide certainty to researchers and research institutions that their international research partnerships, conference presentations, and the careers of PhD students and staff would not be needlessly disrupted. It strikes a better balance between protecting Australia's national security and maintaining collaborations and research and innovation partnerships. I would like to thank the Department of Defence for their diligent and ongoing engagement and collaboration with higher education and research stakeholders to inform the changes to the Act, regulations, and its implementation. I look forward to today's information session on the Defence Export Controls Framework and the materials and support available to help us to navigate the changes. The Australian Academy of Science will continue to assist the research sector and the government in communicating and building an understanding of the requirements and responsibilities that will increasingly be placed upon scientists and the impact of changes on Australia's science system. We have the opportunity today to ask questions of both the experts in defence export controls and government officials involved in understanding and mitigating risks, while ensuring Australia can benefit from its specific research, its scientific research and development. I urge you all to take this opportunity and ask lots of questions. So with that, I thank you, and I'll hand back to Anna Maria.
Thanks, Ivan, for that welcome. Our next speaker is Dr. Nigel McGinty, the Chief Technology Officer for Science Strategy, Communications and International Engagement within the Science Strategy Planning and Engagement Division of the Defence Science and Technology Group. Dr. McGinty is responsible for science strategy and policy direction and outcomes for defence science and technology, ensuring One Defence alignment and advocacy of science and technology across the department. Dr. McGinty also leads DSTG's international engagement program to advance science collaboration with particular emphasis on AUKUS, Five Eyes, NATO and regional partners. Thank you, Nigel.
Good morning, everyone. It's fabulous to be here to talk to you today about defence, innovation, science, technology, security, and all other great things. Professor Marusic seemed to have got my script somehow beforehand, so there's going to be a lot of commonality from what I talk about today to what we just heard from. What I think is really interesting about that is how we have such strong alignment amongst that broader research and development ecosystem. Let me not get ahead of myself though. So let me start by firstly acknowledging the traditional owners and pay my respects to their leaders past, present and emerging, the Ngunnawal people. And also just acknowledge that they were our first scientists and innovators, be that through their observations and discoveries through the use of astronomy for navigation, or through innovative solutions for fish traps to help with their farming practices. It's truly remarkable, and I want to pay my respects to them all. So I'm just going to go back a little bit. So the genesis of DSTG goes back 115 years, when the department appointed the chief chemist in Victoria Barracks in Melbourne to oversee the development and production of cordite. So defence and science and technology has had a long relationship. This year marks the 50th anniversary of when DSTO, was actually formed as part of the Tang Reviews, which integrated a number of defence research facilities around Australia, such as the Weapons Research Establishment in Salisbury and the Aeronautical Research Labs in Melbourne, amongst others. Science, technology, research and development has been an important part of defence, as I said, from just after Federation to now, where I'd suggest the importance is only growing. The Defence Strategic Review, the National Defence Strategy, have shown that innovation, science and technology I may use the acronym IS&T through this because I'm going to say it a few times, is central to the Defence mission. And we've had the Secretary of Defence make that comment to us. This is really important as we move forward. So the NDS points to the multidimensional, complex, strategic environment that we find ourselves in today. An environment where government has made clear that the 10-year planning window is no longer a valid assumption for Defence to use. An environment where Australia may need capabilities to deny an adversary. In fact, the government has set out Defence's planning priorities, its strategy, and it's set by the strategy of denial. This strategy to deny an adversary of something against our national interests, and we do that through shape, deter, respond. So in short, for an adversary to say tonight is not the night, and say that every night for now into forever. And IS&T has a key role to realise this. But first, let me talk about another important concept from DSR and NDS, and that is asymmetry, which has taken prominence in the publications. To state the obvious, we have a small population and a large landmass. As a nation, we need to consider asymmetric ways to deny and asymmetric ways to enact that strategy of denial. Asymmetry is essentially any decision or capability that you have or an adversary thinks you have that upsets the decision calculus. It requires a disproportionate response to counter. There are 7 types of asymmetry. If Professor Munro here, she would list them all off. I'm only going to cover a couple of them, ranging from technology, which we probably think of in the first case, to how that technology is used, all the way through to organisational structures. Essentially, asymmetry seeds uncertainty. And so this asymmetry piece, innovation, science and technology has a key role in delivering. It seems probably at the right time now for me also to mention something that I think you've all heard about, and that is ASCA, the Advanced Strategic Capabilities Accelerator, which was the first government announcement after the DSR. And the accelerated asymmetric capabilities are driven by ASCA. ASCA is critical to the new defence innovation ecosystem, with an objective to avoid strategic surprise and to navigate the innovator's valley of death. Essentially, there's a bit of a bumper sticker, which is there's no mission without transition. We want to be able to, if the mission is successful, we want to be able to navigate that path through to acquisition. And this is important because it will allow us to build new industries, sovereign capabilities, another theme from NDS, and also ensure the continued growth of this technology work. So the NDS did set out the 6 areas, in addition to asymmetry and acceleration, for innovation, science, technology to focus on. Trust autonomy, quantum, hypersonics, long-range fires, information warfare, directed energy. Identifies the areas that IS&T can make the biggest impact. So why am I talking about all these matters in a conference on research security, you may ask? Well, when we released More Together, our strategy, the Defence Science and Technology Strategy in 2020, the goals were aspirational. The goals were not achievable by DSTG, my organisation, alone. We needed to transform our partnering to achieve the scale, to focus on Defence's priorities to maximise the impact. Fast forward to now, and this is even more important than ever before. The strategic settings that I spoke about articulate this. We don't have a 10-year window. We need asymmetric, novel capabilities that provides a denial or deterrent effect. So the NDS sets out an even more ambitious program, which cannot be solved just by the Department of Defence. and it was interesting, the introductory remarks, that the role of science diplomacy was mentioned, and we absolutely are committed to that. And as Anna Maria said in the introduction, I do look after our regional engagement and international engagement program. And so we do work with a range of countries to build, like-minded countries, to build collective capabilities and awareness and advancement. And so that is really important when we think about what I'll talk about in the rest of my comments here. We do look for an open, balanced research and development ecosystem. It meets all of our interests. So we must look to align our interests to amplify outcomes. So it's like detour. The United States is always or often looked at ways to do S&T, and I realise that's a sweeping statement which you can all argue, but I just want to flag that, and I found this number last night, that 41.2% of all federally funded research and development in the US is funded through the Pentagon. This is not the system that we have here, and nor do we want that system, if I'm really honest. But in order to align and amplify, we need to work together, more together, to reference back to our old strategy. We need to work together. We need to make sure our ideas, our intellect is protected. Yes, for commercial reasons, to be able to build industries that I mentioned before. That's usually where things stop. But we also need to make sure that we protect our ideas, our intellect, so that Australia is able to use technology in asymmetric ways for our national security, for defence, and in the national interest. So let's not undervalue our capabilities either. We have a wonderful research and development ecosystem through this country. Absolutely amazing, world leading. And ASIO, also from the introductory comments, have shown recently that there are vulnerabilities in our system. Other countries are very interested in what we have, and the annual Director General's statement from ASIO is sobering listening, reading, to understand that. Of course, recent reporting, you'd all be aware of the ADF member who was alleged to be spying for Russia. And yes, it's inside defence, but reporting would indicate that WUMRA was indeed of interest, and it is clear that it's real and it's here. ASIO also departed, I think late last year, a nest of spies was how it was reported from India. Fizz is real. So, and earlier this year, The Guardian had an article titled, and I'll just read the title, "Academics in the US, UK and Australia collaborate on drone research with Iranian university close to the regime." Make what you like with that. So whilst it might seem distant, our ADF are in the Gulf. And I know from my extremely limited research record, I wouldn't want that to be mentioned or used in any way against our national interest. So what if this was close at home? What if this was against the strategy of denial? This is one reason why we need our enhanced security to our research sector. It is a complex tapestry, of course, with UFIT, the legislative changes under AUKUS that we'll talk about today, Foreign Investment Review Board, Foreign Arrangements Act, and of course the DISP process that Defence has for ensuring our system is secure. And all those instruments and whatnot do work in accordance with each other. It's pleasing to say that the sector has really come together to realise UFIT, and to say that over 30 of our universities have entry-level or higher DISP membership, and an additional 5 are going through the application process now. This shows the commitment of the sector is making and how we have made amazing strides in the last 4 to 5 years, actually since the release of More Together. I mean, more together, the aspirational goal there was about growing and maturing the partnerships between defence and the research and development ecosystem. So, of course, with dismembership, it means that universities now have security officers, one of the recommendations of UFIT, and can also sponsor security clearances moving forward. And these higher levels of insurance, and even higher levels, will ensure cyber and physical security levels are increased. We're currently going through the final stages of developing a new defence IS&T strategy, and it will be launched in September at an event that we're leading called ADSTAR. Here's my plug, do come along, it's here in Canberra. We will be launching the strategy there. And a key element of this strategy is about next generation partnerships as we continue to build from the aspirations of more together moving forward. And ensuring that defence IS&T ecosystem further enhances security. We can do this because of the great strides that have already been made. So in this enhanced environment, we will share more freely with those academics and industry partners that have security clearances. We'll provide information on threats and the threats the nation faces, and information on the directions for defence and opportunities to understand defence's needs, opportunities to respond to defence's needs. And we will be doing that as part of this new strategy moving forward. So this is really acknowledgement and recognition that we're all in this together. We're all building our capabilities. And we're also looking to establish defence research centres, which will support classified research in a university setting. Now, I don't really want to talk about this in any detail here, to be launched in September, but it is something that I'd say that these research centres would be enable an environment for appropriate level classified work to be done that is balanced with the non-national security work. So what's important for this meeting this morning is that we continue to look at enhancing and expanding the defence IS&T ecosystem and in an enduring and secure way. AUKUS Pillar 1 and 2, I have got through most of my speech without mentioning AUKUS too many times. But AUKUS Pillar 1 and 2 do provide some amazing opportunities for Australia. It is about alignment on topics that will have maximum impact for us, and about delivering capability for the three nations. And so this is about enduring business models for industries that will deliver outcomes. So we will need to do this in a coordinated way for the specific objectives of AUKUS, for example. And where we are doing this, making sure the themes are aligned with the defence IS&T ecosystem contributing. We are doing this already. So for AUKUS Pillar 2, we're working with the ecosystem. The quantum theme, for example, is relying heavily on the expertise in the university sector, which is world leading. The other is around AI and autonomy, and the objectives there are being delivered with industry and university and demonstrating in the three nations world. So AUKUS Pillar 2 is currently working with universities. Yes, we can do more, and I'll let my AUKUS colleagues talk about that at another time. But it's the way we reach out across the ecosystem, share these challenges are important. And so we are looking at enhancing the ADSUN network, the network which connects together the universities, most universities of this nation, to share information and knowledge, opportunities and collaborative projects. Importantly, working with other AUKUS nations, universities and industry base will allow us to create scale and hence viable, strong business models in trusted environments. One significant change that creates these opportunities is the reforms to the export controls regime. The streamlining of legislation and creating of licence-free environments enables collaboration at the speed and scale to meet our strategic circumstances. We can't wait 10 years. We need asymmetric, novel capabilities now. Australia is world-leading and has niche advantages, and this trilateral arrangement helps us. These AUKUS amendments to export legislation creates the industry growth and export opportunities. Also mentioned in the introduction comments was about fundamental research. So the definitions of fundamental research in legislation enables and protects the key discovery and exploratory components that we do for research in our university sector and elsewhere. But the intent of the changes is to protect sensitive defence goods and technologies from being passed foreign nations not aligned with our interests in a manner that may harm our national interests. And this leads me to the last point I'd like to talk about this morning, and that is dual-use technologies. A major component of the export controls legislation covers dual-use goods, and it's important to be mindful of this. A few weeks ago, we actually held a dual-use forum in Sydney with Innovation Oz, brought together over 100 industry leaders, investment bankers and venture capitalists, as well as academics and government representatives, to really consider how we can both support industries, exploit dual-use technologies, but also have the level of protection that's needed. And so whilst we're still in the process of really analysing the results here, the traditional response of providing a lower spec version for commercial use and protecting a secure higher defence variant is of course of importance for us. But there are other things that came through this forum. Firstly, the investment end of town wanted to really understand the demand signals. What is it that defence needs and why? That will allow them to invest. They can have patient capital, but they need to know what. And so earlier in my notes here, I talked about what we intend on doing to share more broadly those defence's needs. Defence may be a first customer, but not in all situations. But when we are, we need to prioritise investment, was the recommendation. But increasingly, defence might be looking to leverage technology led through a commercial or other market, a unique bespoke element which will need to be protected, but only a component for the defence piece. I think all these areas are worth reflecting on this morning as we go through the range of presentations and panel discussions. So in conclusion, Defence IS&T continues to present many opportunities to the broader research community, driven by the need for leading edge to give a strategic advantage in our strategic environment that we face, core to delivering national defence strategy. But being able to maintain this strategic advantage, we need to secure our knowledge, inventions and defence capabilities. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time and have a great day.
Thank you very much, Nigel. I think it's abundantly clear that communication and collaboration are absolutely key to what we are all doing. And of course, we're all driven by the national interest, and that is in part the problem, isn't it? Part of the challenge here, I think, is R&D contributes to national security, but it can also be a risk to it. And whilst we all pursue our national interest, we need to find that balance. Thank you very much for those words. I'd now like to welcome Emily Hall, Assistant Secretary of the Defence Export Controls, and Rosanna Domenici, Director of Program Implementation from the Defence Export Control Reform Team, to present information on the Defence Export Controls. This is really where the rubber hits the road, and we can understand what it means for all of us and ensure we are able to comply and continue to the best of our ability to undertake the R&D that's required for our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Maria and Ivan, for your warm welcome and inviting Defence to speak this morning, and many thanks to Nigel for your opening remarks. It's a pleasure to be here with our partners from the Australian Academy of Science, and on behalf of the Defence Exports Control Team, we are very appreciative to the Academy for hosting this event. Canberra means meeting place, and as many of us have travelled to be here or participating virtually online from all over Australia, it's fitting to have the opportunity to gather here today to speak about the Defence Trade Controls Act, the recent amendments to the Act and how they may impact you and your business, and how Defence is working with the research and higher education sector to prepare for the legislation to come into effect from the 1st of September and then fully enforced from the 1st of March next year. My colleague, Rosanna Domenici, Director Implementation, will discuss the support available to help you to navigate these changes. I'd also like to acknowledge the staff from the Academy that have been part of the Defence Export Control Higher Education Working Group, who are here today. Anna Maria, Lauren, Chris and Alexandra, who have been meeting with Defence twice a month this year to help the Defence Trade Controls Amendment Act and regulations and to help us to get it right. Defence Export Control, otherwise known as DEC, regulates the responsible movement of defence-related goods and technology in line with Australia's export control framework. Export controls are an essential element of Australia's non-proliferation, arms control and disarmament policies, and of our international commitments to being a responsible exporter. Australia's defence-related export control framework is built around the Defence and Strategic Goods List, the DSGL. The Customs Regulations and the Defence Trade Controls Act define prohibitions and regulations by reference to what is in the DSGL. The DSGL is over 300 pages long and captures a variety of goods, software and technology. It consists of two parts. Part 1, otherwise known as the munitions list, covers defence and related goods inherently lethal goods and technologies designed or adapted for use by armed forces. Part 2 covers dual-use goods, equipment and technologies developed to meet commercial needs, but also capable of being used as military components or the development of military systems. There are over 2,500 unique item codes listed on the DSGL. Any person or entity wishing to export, supply, publish or broker goods and technology from the DSGL, the Defence Strategic Goods List, will need to lodge a permit with DEC and meet obligations around reporting and compliance. In 2023, you can see that DEC received 3,759 permit applications. The vast majority were approved. I think only a handful were denied. And about 1/3 of last year's permits were for goods and technology destined to the US or the UK. And from 1 September, the vast majority will no longer require an export permit. So that's around 900 permits per year that will no longer be required. The Defence Trade Controls Act was originally passed by Parliament in November 2012. The policy intent then and now remains focused on preventing sensitive military defence goods and technologies from being transferred to foreign entities in ways that prejudice Australia's national interests. This is a permissive system. We assess permit applications on a case-by-case basis, underpinned by a risk-based methodology and in line with our administrative law principles. The 2024 reforms do not change this underlying principle of Australia's export control framework. We want to work with you, with our exporters, to understand your needs, share information about our shared risk environment, discuss how best to manage those risks, and work together to design a permit that helps you do your business. As Nigel was talking about, the Defence Strategic Review 2023 and the government's response sets an agenda for ambitious but necessary reform to Defence's posture and structure. At its centre is the reality of renewed major power competition, a competition in which Australia is more relevant now than at any time in our history. This is because the centre of gravity is in our region, the Indo-Pacific, where we're seeing the biggest military build-up anywhere in the world since World War II. To keep pace with these emerging challenges, it's essential Australia has a robust protective security environment, which is why, in collaboration with our AUKUS partners, the US and the UK, we have made amendments to the Defence Trade Controls Act. Both the US and the UK are also making legislative changes so that we align our defence trade controls and information sharing laws to minimise policy and financial barriers and to enhance collaboration. The intent is not to stifle existing collaboration and trade between Australia and other international partners, but to strike the right balance between protecting Australia's national security and supporting economic prosperity and research collaboration. This is achieved by narrowing the scope of the Act to those items and activities that could prejudice Australia's security, defence or international relations. So of the 3,759 permits that we issue each year, the amendments and the reforms focus on roughly 1,503 permits that we issue each year for highly lethal goods and technology on Part 1 and Part 2, the sensitive and very sensitive lists of the DSGL. That's what these reforms are focusing on. There are a number of exemptions in the DTC Amendment Act. Defence has consulted widely across government, higher education, industry and the research sectors to ensure Australia's export controls are fit for purpose. The exceptions seek to reduce the compliance burden faced by industry, higher education and research sectors, while ensuring the controls adequately address Australia's national security requirements. The DTC Amendments Act, as we've mentioned, was passed by Parliament in March this year and received royal assent on the 8th of April. The Defence Trade Legislation Amendment Regulations were released for public comment in May this year, for the month of May, and were approved by the Executive Council and the Governor-General last week, Friday the 19th of July. Many people in this room have been involved in those in negotiations and helping us draft both the Act and the regs, so again, thank you. These legislative and regulatory changes officially commence 1 September, marking the start of the licence-free AUKUS environment, with the new controls enforced 6 months later in March next year. Amidst these amendments to both the Act and regulations, I'd like to take a moment to highlight how important the defence export control research and higher education sector has been. Your feedback has been integral in helping us, as we've mentioned earlier, produce a comprehensive definition of fundamental research, providing a new lower threshold for what equates to research. So thank you to the Academy of Social Sciences and the University of 8 for their advocacy and work on that. Making it clearer in the DSGL that clinical trials do not require permits, and many thanks to the contributions from many involved in the Clinical Trials Working Group under the leadership of Professor Ian Chubb. Reducing paperwork and compliance requirements by making it clear that if you hold a foreign work authorisation permit under the Safeguarding Military Secrets Act, you do not need an export permit for the same activity under Section 10A and Section 10C. So thank you, AI Group, for your advocacy on this issue. We've also created certainty for academics by including grandfathering provisions or grandmothering provisions for Sections 10B and 10C of the permit types, so you can have confidence in the management of ongoing research and export projects that you currently have underway that occurred and commenced prior to 1 September. And thank you for the University of Melbourne for your work on that, those amendments. We've also heard your requests to expand the list of countries on the foreign country list to help international collaboration. We've amended the criteria for the foreign country list to provide the Minister for Defence the authority to add countries where they are in the interests of Australia and of our national security, economic prosperity or international relations. I'd also welcome continued feedback on who should be added to the list of 25 countries to enable greater access to the foreign country list exemption under the Act. The Defence Trade Controls Amendment Act amends Australia's export control framework in two key ways. First, it's provided a national exemption to the US and the UK from Australia's export control permit requirements. From 1 September, approximately 70% of defence trade will be made eligible for licence-free movement between the three countries, fast-tracking everyday defence industrial cooperation between verified entities in Australia, the UK and the US. To access this licence-free environment, you need to enrol into the AUKUS community by registering with the Defence Export Controls team via our website and notifying us when you use the licence-free environment. The second part of the reforms relate to the creation of 3 new controls in the Defence Trade Controls Act. And I want to take some time to go through them with you today. So we'll work our way through the 3 controls. Section 10A, otherwise known as deemed export, it's a kind of American terminology, relates to the supply of defence and strategic goods list technology to a non-exempt foreign person within Australia. So it's within Australia only. So what is DSGL technology? DSGL technology is defined on the DSGL as specific information necessary for the development, production or use of a product. This information takes the form of technical data or technical assistance. So how it's been explained to me is, if you've got a pen, the DSGL technology is the information about how the pen works. So technical assistance may take forms such as instructions, skills, training, working knowledge, and consulting services, and may involve the transfer of technical data. Technical data may take the form of blueprints, plans, diagrams, models, formulae, tables, engineering designs and specifications, manuals and instructions written or recorded on other media or devices. So what's a non-exempt foreign person? Only foreign persons from a country that is not on the DTC Act's foreign country list are subject to the Section 10A control. So if you're supplying to an Australian citizen, permanent resident or dual citizen, or a person from any of the 25 foreign country list countries, you will not require a permit. The 25 foreign country list countries are Austria, Denmark, Hungary, the Netherlands, Spain, Belgium, Finland, Ireland, New Zealand, Sweden, Bulgaria, France, Italy, Norway, Switzerland, Canada, Germany, Japan, Poland, United Kingdom, Czech Republic, Greece, Luxembourg, Portugal, and the US. Now, these countries have been listed on the foreign country list. It's a legal instrument, it's available online, because they are members of all 4 international multilateral export control regimes, and Australia has deemed their export controls to be comparable to Australia's. Now, I'd like to go through the exemptions to Section 10A. So the Act includes a number of exemptions, and of particular interest to us today is the fundamental research exemption. As Nigel outlined, fundamental research means basic or applied research conducted in circumstances where the results of the research are intended for public disclosure or would ordinarily be published or shared broadly, and are not subject to any restrictions on disclosure, however imposed, for purposes connected with the security or defence of Australia or another country. Fundamental research is excluded from export controls, so researchers can freely exchange and publish their results. We heard from the Group of 8 loud and clear and have enshrined the fundamental research exemption into the Act, providing researchers with more confidence that they won't be at risk of breaking the law by undertaking discovery research, simply speaking at a conference, teaching an undergrad student, or collaborating with a colleague. In short, the threshold is now lower for what equates to fundamental research, meaning a greater range of research activities will qualify and thereby not need a permit. The other exemptions are, as I mentioned, citizens and permanent residents of countries on the foreign country list, people who hold a covered security clearance, an NV1, granted by a Five Eyes government. So that's a government of the US, the UK, New Zealand, Canada, and Australia. Build-to-print exemptions. This was co-drafted with industry. It allows for the transfer of information to enable the manufacture of the components of DSGL goods. Persons holding a foreign work authorisation permit under the Safeguarding Australia's Military Security Act for the same activity, and supplying to Australian government employees in the course of their work or duties, as well as AUKUS trilateral partners. So then we move on to Section 10B, otherwise known as the re-export control, and Section 10B regulates the resupply of certain DSGL goods and technology previously exported or supplied from Australia to foreign persons outside Australia. The Section 10B control does not apply to the whole DSGL. It's limited to DSGL goods and technology listed in Part 1 of the DSGL, the munitions list that I outlined earlier, and on the sensitive and very sensitive lists in Part 2 of the DSGL. So we get every year, we get roughly about 40% of our permits that we get each year that we review and approve would fall into this category of Part 1 and sensitive and very sensitive lists on Part 2 of the DSGL. The Section 10B control does not apply where a permit for the initial supply from Australia was issued prior to 1 September 2024. So that's part of the grandfathering provisions. And in addition, when and only when DSGL Part 2 goods and technology is supplied, the Section 10B control does not apply if an FCL country is involved. So to put that into context, of the 1,503 permits we issued last year for Part 1 and Part 2 sensitive and very sensitive goods and technology, only 100 were to a non-FCL country. So we're very focused in our reforms on what we're interested in and what goods and technologies we want to track. An integral part of the Section 10B control is that it lapses after a certain amount of time since initial supply has passed. This is 12 months for DSGL goods that are listed on Part 1, the munitions list, and DSGL Part 2 goods and technology on the very sensitive list. The Section 10B control will lapse after 6 months for DSGL Part 2 goods and technology on the sensitive list. As previously discussed in Section 10A, the fundamental research exemption applies to Section 10B, along with the FCL exemption specifically for Part 2 of the DSGL. The Section 10B control also does not apply when the initial supply out of Australia occurred under existing permits granted prior to 1 September. The person receiving the supply holds a covered 5i security clearance, that's an NV1 or secret security clearance. The goods or technology are returning back to Australia. The goods or technology are returning to the original manufacturer, or if it involves an AUKUS trilateral partner. Section 10C regulates the provision of DSGL services related to Part 1 of the munitions list and only to foreign persons or entities offshore. So this is a purely offshore control. DSGL services is defined as the giving of assistance, including training in relation to the design, development, engineering, manufacture, production, assembly, testing, repair, maintenance, modification, destruction, processing or use of DSGL goods that are or DSGL technology that is within the scope of Part 1 of the DSGL. So the munitions list, the highly lethal list of goods. 10C exemptions include citizens, permanent residents, government entities or bodies corporate of Canada and New Zealand, individuals holding a foreign work authorisation under the Safeguarding Australia's Military Secrets Act, services provided in connection with the permitted supply of DSGL goods or technology, services provided in connection to a lawful supply of DSGL goods and technology and are provided in line with a contract, agreement or arrangement that commenced prior to 1 September 2024, And again, I just want to note that the Section 10C control is confined to the provision of DSGL services outside Australia only. I then want to move to record keeping. So under the Act, all permit holders are required to keep records about the supply of technology and the supply of exports, and that requirement under Section 58 remains. A new requirement is for those who are members of the AUKUS community and want to take advantage of the AUKUS licence-free environment. So when you're using the AUKUS licence-free environment, you need to notify DEC before an export takes place, and that's simply a description of DSGL goods, technologies and services involved, the individual receiving them, which AUKUS country they are being received in, and the date or dates over which this will occur. We've gotten a lot of feedback around kind of ongoing projects or big projects and not having to kind of notify every single time you make a supply. So we have, within the regs, agreed that you do not need to provide separate pre-notification every time a good or technology is transferred from Australia to a person from an AUKUS country. Rather, a notification can be provided covering a range of DSGL goods, technologies and services over a specified period of time, so long as they are to the same person or entity. So that kind of covers off the bigger projects that some exporters are working on. Before I hand over to Rosanna, I just want to do another plug for the foreign country list. The interweaving of the foreign country list into various exemptions to the new controls provides flexibility for the Australian government, but also for you. And it's a very important exemption to Section 10A and Section 10B. The list can now be easily modified at any point in time by the Minister for Defence if they are satisfied it's in the interests of Australia. So please continue to provide your views to Defence on additional countries to be added to the foreign country list. While the Act and the regs are finalised, our relationship with our exporters, our consultation, our engagement with you continues as we implement those amendments, and we want to keep hearing from you and receiving your feedback. So thank you, and now I'll pass to Rosanna Domenici to take us through how Defence is supporting you through these changes. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you to the Australian Academy of Science for jointly hosting this important session with us this morning. Emily has spoken about how the legislation is coming into effect on the 1st of September and what is changing. And so now I'm going to take you through how we plan to support you and work with you through this change. And this change has been strongly shaped by our extensive engagement with the Academy and others in the higher education and research sector, as well as the industry sector. So Defence is very committed that these reforms are effectively and efficiently implemented, and a key principle for us is co-design. So it's really important that we work with you to ensure that these changes are fit for purpose and will enable collaboration, cooperation, co-development among and between our AUKUS partners. So if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for us. And that was a key theme of our trilateral engagement with our AUKUS partners. So what we did was we created, as Emily mentioned, 2 new working groups to assist us with the implementation of this new legislation. So we implemented the first one, the Industry and Investment Working Group, and the Higher Education and Research Sector Working Group to work with us. And these 2 working groups have worked alongside the pre-existing Defence Export Controls Working Group that was established when the Defence Trade Controls Act was introduced in 2012. As Emily mentioned, the Academy has played a very important role in these working groups. These working groups meet twice a month since January, and they have supported the passing of the legislation, provided advice and co-designed a number of provisions. And it's been touched on earlier today, the fundamental research provision, the build-to-print, covered security clearances, foreign work authorisation permits and lapsing timeframes, and not to mention the updates on the legislative criteria and record-keeping requirements. So I echo Emily's comments with regard to our thanks to the Academy, especially Anna Maria and Lauren for their involvement in the working groups. So to support us in implementation and compliance with the changes and to help us navigate and prepare, Defence received funding in the federal budget to enable effective and efficient implementation, and we have set up a reform program. And as part of the reform program, we are conducting outreach with stakeholders across Australia to increase awareness. This program also is developing a suite of education and guidance materials to support stakeholder decision-making of permit requirements, including a new e-learning module, fact sheets and case studies, of which a lot of these materials are being co-designed with our working groups. So many thanks. We are also upgrading our ICT system to provide a more streamlined, intuitive and secure customer service experience, which has included inviting various working group members to participate in user acceptance testing. So once again, thanks very much. I think co-design is a real important element, and we're at this point because of that co-design element and working together to make a better product. So thank you. Delivery of the upgraded ICT system for 1st of September will include a new public-facing portal that will improve the customer experience and make self-service easier for you. And part of this ICT system includes a self-assessment tool whose aim is to clarify the control status of goods, technologies or services and guide you to the next steps. And that was a key feature of the independent review of the DTC Act that was conducted last year. Lastly, we are redesigning the website so it's easy to use, information is easy to find and encourages self-service. Perfect, excellent. As I mentioned, Defence is conducting outreach with stakeholders across Australia to increase awareness. So today, this is the first event kicking off our information sessions. Stakeholders across the nation can register to attend over the next couple of months and learn more about the changes and how the changes may impact them. So we'll be in Perth at the end of this week, Townsville on the 7th of August. Melbourne will be attending twice on the 13th of August and also on the 13th of September when Land Forces is on. Sydney on the 20th, Brisbane and then Adelaide on the 27th of August. So these sessions are being facilitated and cross-promoted through various organisations. And as Nigel mentioned before, the Australian Defence Science and Universities Network, ADSUN, is one of those, AMDA, the Australian Defence Magazine, and today's session by the Australian Academy of Science. So thank you. This collaboration enables Defence to expand its outreach to those who have not previously engaged with defence export controls, which may be affected by these new offences. And for those that cannot attend in person, we'll be conducting virtual sessions in August, and all our events have been listed and are available on our Defence Export Controls website. The next topic I'd like to cover is our new ICT system. So over the last few years, we have been gathering your feedback, and it's really important because a technology is an enabler. And so without users using it, the technology is useless. So we've got feedback on applications forms, on how you use them, portal design, certain pain points, and we've also brought into account how many times you call Defence Export Control or write to us via email. So we've taken all that into consideration and we've designed the new portal and even its name. So I'm very pleased to be able to announce, and this is the first time we're announcing it publicly, that we've settled on a name of My Australian Defence Exports Made, and we think it is made well. MADE will be used to apply for permits and used to apply for the licence-free environment. On 1 September, we will be improving the user experience from what we have today. And so we all know that the system we have today is simple processing. It lacks status updates, so you don't know where your application is. You need to contact Defence Export Controls. It has limited self-help, and there is a reliance on calling us. So we want to change that to the new ICT system. So we're launching it on the 1st of September, and it will be a more intuitive and user-friendly system where you'll be able to experience increased self-service capability to manage your data, to manage your DCRM, track your status, maintain visibility of your application instead of ringing export controls. You will experience greater security via the adoption of the Australian Government Digital Identity System, MyGovID, which lends itself to improving research security in Australia. And you'll have the ability to apply for and view your AUKUS membership in the licence-free environment, as well as having greater access to guidance materials through self-assessment of the application type required for your activity, which leads me to the next part of our presentation, which is our exciting new capability, our self-assessment tool. So our new self-assessment tool will be available, and one of the first things you'll see when you log into the MAID portal is your self-assessment tool. And so it's not mandatory, but it's extremely useful as a guide, especially for those that have never applied for a permit. The self-assessment tool does not constitute legal advice. It's a guide to clarify the control status of your goods, technology or services and guide you to the next steps. So what you will experience when you use the self-assessment tool is the assessment outcome of whether you do need a permit or not, and it will guide you to the appropriate form to complete. And as a reminder, it is a guide to assist you on your pathway through export controls. And I'm excited to launch this capability on the 1st of September and learn with you as we progress through the iterations and further develop based on your feedback. So thank you. The next part is another quite exciting part of the puzzle. So we've got our ICT upgrade, our new self-assessment capability, and yes, there's more, our new e-learning program. But before I get started, I'd like to take this opportunity to recognise and thank those who assisted with the user acceptance testing earlier this month to give us your feedback, which was quite valuable, and we've actioned it or we have earmarked it for future consideration, so thank you. The e-learning program is titled Navigating Australia's Defence Export Control Framework, and it is a comprehensive and interactive learning experience that will cover topics such as those covered today with the different elements of the Defence Export Controls Framework, permits, exemptions, and how to comply. And it'll also cover the application process, so you are aware what happens when you hit submit on an application. To make the content more relevant to you when you go through your e-learning journey, as it's quite interesting because people learn in different ways. We've defined the e-learning program to cater in our different stakeholder cohorts. So we've got our higher education and research sector and our industry sector. So the first scenario is targeted at our higher education and research sector stakeholders, and our second scenario is focused at our industry sector. And so you will choose the pathway in terms that is benefit to yourself. The program will be available via the Defence Export Controls website, where you can sign in using your work email. And in addition to the e-learning platform, we have given consideration towards export controls professionalisation, which I know has been a major topic of conversation for the research sector. This addresses a recommendation from last year's Defence Trade Controls independent review to develop and implement an accreditation system that builds and maintains export control compliance expertise in Australia. Over the next 12 months, we will be engaging, co-designing and implementing a solution alongside industry and academia with the intent to establish a standardised certification framework for export control practitioners. This will address a much-needed skill set in the export control market while raising the standard and ability of the Australian defence and dual-use industrial base to manage international defence supply chains. So we look forward to working with you on this key endeavour. So in summary, things to remember. I encourage you to get across these upcoming changes, noting that there is a 6-month grace period for the new controls from the 1st of September through to March 2025. There will be increased and continued communications in the lead up to the 1st of September and support to help you get ready if you are having difficulties. As a reminder, I've put on this slide how to get in contact with Defence Export Controls for more information. So please reach out to the team via email, via our website, or give us a call. We're happy to take your phone calls. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. And now we'll move to a QA session. Yep. Thank you. So we have in the audience our Safeguarding Australia's Military Secrets colleague. Carlos, would you like to join us up here to answer questions? So I know that we didn't cover the SAMS legislation, which passed with the Amendment Act on the 27th of March this year, and I know it's been of great interest to stakeholders out there. So if you've got questions in terms of the SAMS legislation or the Defence Trade Controls Amendment Act or anything we've spoken about today, please raise your hand and we've got a microphone to pass round. But I'll go to the floor. Alex is part of our team. Thanks, Alex. We'll go to the online cohort now. Have you got any questions coming from our online attendees today?
Thank you, Rosanna. We have had some good questions come through, so thank you to everyone online who has participated. So Matthew is just hoping to confirm the actual commencement date of the regulations is the 1st of September, that's correct? Yep. We have 2 questions come through from Marcellus, who is viewing from Singapore. So Marcellus has asked, is Section 10B equivalent to a deemed export rule? Are you able to expand on Section 10B and deemed exports?
Yeah, so Section 10B is the re-export. So I was going through that earlier. I'm just kind of flicking back to my notes. So Section 10B is the re-export. So it's the supply of goods and technology on Part 1 of the munitions list on DSGL, and Part 2, the dual-use items listed under the sensitive and very sensitive lists of the DSGL. So that's the re-export control. Yep, so the deemed export is Section 10A, which is about what happens in Australia, and it's the supply of defence and strategic goods technology to a non-exempt foreign person within Australia. So there's a difference.
Thank you. We do have an additional question. It may be a good trial run for our self-assessment tool that goes live on the 1st of September, but if we can't answer this one, we can also take it on notice. So it's also from Marcellus viewing in Singapore, who has inquired as to if sensitive list DSGL technology is transferred from a company in Australia to an affiliate company in India with a licence, if that Indian affiliate company shares that information with its employees who are not FCL, will a deemed re-export licence be required?
I think the Defence Trade Controls Amendment Act kind of flips our thinking about how we think about whether we need a permit. So what I would say is for everybody, because when I go out and talk to people, everyone kind of comes and gives me an example, but what I really encourage everybody in the room and online is to really think about, okay, what are we exporting? What are you exporting? What is it on the DSGL? Is it technology? Is it service? Is it goods? Is it on Part 1? Is it on part 2? Whereabouts is it on part 2? And then I would think, what's the purpose? What's the purpose of my export? So would the fundamental research exemption apply? Would the build to print exemption apply? Would the grandfathering provisions apply? Because I've already got a permit in place and this work is continuing after 1 September. I'd also be thinking about who am I supplying to? Am I supplying to an FCL country and citizens, dual nationals? Am I supplying to someone who has a security clearance? Am I supplying to an Australian government employee? So I'd just kind of go through those questions and look at the exemptions and the carve-outs and see what fits my circumstances. And I just, I suppose I want to highlight, like, some of these exemptions are actually quite powerful. The security clearance exemption from a Five Eyes country is quite powerful. And as Nigel was talking about, if universities have dismembership, or they're working with private companies that have dismembership, if you are level 2, you can sponsor Australian government security clearances for your employees. So take advantage of that opportunity. If you're collaborating with the UK, a UK university, a UK industry or government, you can access UK security clearances. You don't need to be a UK citizen to be able to get a clearance from the UK government. You need to meet residency requirements. Now, I would assume a lot of people in the research sector have spent time in the UK. They may be eligible for that. I would also be thinking about the grandfathering provisions. What are you thinking about doing next year? Can you put in an application now to take advantage of that opportunity to have a 5-year permit cover you before 1 September? I'm actually surprised I haven't seen a peak in permit applications to take advantage of this exemption. So I would just really encourage everyone in the room, as Rosanna was saying, get across the regs, get across the Act. We're happy to help and sit down and talk to you, but there's some really powerful exemptions that you can use to help you do your business. So yeah, please take advantage of those and get in contact with us if you want further information.
Thank you. We also have a question from Tyler from the ANU. What can we do to get a head start on applying for a DCRN or to be a member of the AUKUS licence-free environment?
Tyler, was it?
Yes.
Hey Tyler, how you doing? Thanks for your question. So to get ahead, I think what Emily said is get a really good understanding of the regulations. So what you'll note in the regulations is 10A is subject to set different criteria to 10B and C. So really understanding what the application process will be. Applying for the AUKUS licence-free environment will take place on the 1st of September when the legislation is in effect. We've been working with our US cohort at the moment on policy decisions around how to enrol and how to get you in that licence-free environment. So we're hoping to make various announcements over the next few weeks. However, that we can't enrol stakeholders in the licence-free environment until we are US certified, so until we're made comparable with our US and UK partners. But what I can say is the MAID portal will have the ability to enable you to apply to become an AUKUS authorised user, and that process will be available on the 1st of September.
And I'll just add, if you're an entity that's part of the US-Australia Defence Trade Treaty, you will automatically be enrolled into the AUKUS community. If you have received a permit to the US or the UK from us previously, we will be emailing you and asking whether you would like to be enrolled in the AUKUS community. And if we don't know you and you haven't had a permit with us before, but you'd like to take advantage of the licence-free environment, you can log on to our website and apply for AUKUS, apply to be enrolled into the AUKUS community. The information that we'll be seeking from you to enrol you will be the same information, the same form that our US counterparts will be using and our UK counterparts. So it'll be the same streamlined forms.
Thanks, Alex. I'm just wondering, Lauren, do we have anyone in the room that would like to ask a question? Yeah, perfect. Excellent. But we go to the front here.
Thanks very much. My name's Sean O'Byrne. I'm from the Australian National University. My area of research is in hypersonics, which is covered by sections 9B005 and 9B107 of the dual-use technology list. Basically, my entire research area is covered by those two things. Recently, one of the amendments to this Act involved extending export to export within country. So as an academic, I would estimate, I don't have the figures, but I would estimate that about 10% of my HDR students, or any HDR students in an engineering school within Australia, would be on that list of foreign countries that you have described. We'd be lucky to make 10%, I would say. So does that put me in the position where if I'm sharing information about my research area that's covered completely by those two sections of that Act, that I've just lost, there we go, that I'm at risk of even unintentionally exporting information? And how do I determine whether anything that I share with that student is actually controlled or not? Because my experience with interacting with defence export controls as an academic from a university has not been, let's say, easy.
I think to your point about the FCL countries, I think that's the feedback that we're getting from a lot of universities and research sectors, that a lot of the PhD students are not from FCL countries, and we acknowledge that. That's why it's really important to get that feedback formally to us so that we can inform our advice to government around expanding the FCL list, because that is something that we are seriously looking at, and we will be making some amendments to the FCL list shortly. So keep that feedback and put that formally in writing to us via our email address. It really depends. Again, I say it depends in regards to each permit application. It's case by case and it's risk-based. So I would encourage you to engage with DEC and talk to us about what you're doing, what kind of research, who your researchers are, your students, or who you're engaging with, who you're supplying to, and we can talk about what permit's right for you, and again, going through those exemptions and whether there are some exemptions that might cover off on some of your students who might be here for a while, who might be dual citizens that you don't know of, who might be, able to get a clearance. And we can start that process if you're part of the sorry, go.
If I can just respond to that. Mm-hmm. So my last interaction with DEC on this was to do with an invitation from the head of the Taiwanese Space Agency, wanting to discuss possible collaboration on hypersonic facilities with me. And I contacted DEC by email. I was told you have to fill in a form. I went and found the form eventually on the website. That form required me to provide a registration number and the name of an applicant that was already registered with DEC. That wasn't me, that was in my institution. I then had to go to my institution, I had to find the person, get their number. They had to submit the form on my behalf after asking me several questions because they don't really know what my research area involves. And then presumably DEC will contact them, and they will contact me, and if there are any other things that need to, I think you can get the point, right? This is not facilitating this sort of work, because by the time I've been through that process, and I've been through it a few times now, the people have lost interest in talking to me. I like the fact that you have like the improvement in your online presence that allows people to ask questions. How is that going to help academics to facilitate their work without falling afoul of these provisions? Because that's really what interests me.
So that's one of the key reasons why we've done a major uplift of our ICT portal, so people can have better control of their applications and seeing where it goes. As Rosanna was mentioning, in August, we're going to have kind of some speed dating sessions where you'll be able to book in online or if you're in Canberra, you can come into our office and you can meet with a technical assessor and a risk assessor and talk about your circumstances and how the Act may or may not impact you. So that those dates and booking information will be on our website. So that will be one key way that you can kind of meet with someone face-to-face to kind of talk about your project and how to take it forward.
Hello, my name's Stephen Dalton. Hey. I have a question that's kind of related to the description that Emily just laid out for us. So the whole point of the Amendment Act is to realise this AUKUS licence-free environment. Now, recently, Department of State, Department of Commerce has already rolled out its changes. Department of State has published its in the Federal Register. Part of to allow them to commence is a required congressional certification that will effectively mean that Australia and the UK have implemented similar controls that will exist within the United States. Now, Emily has just laid out a number of instances where there will be significant differentiation between the American controls and Australian controls. In Section 10A, the deemed exports, what I'll call them, the definitions around dual national, if you are a citizen or a permanent resident of Australia or one of the FCL countries, then you're exempt. That's kind of flipped the other way from what exists within US dual nationality controls. Also, the FCL you mentioned was a very big exemption. I agree with that. But the FCL actually was originally put in place to kind of give an exemption to the brokering controls in Australia. Those countries had already signed up to the 4 different Rosanna and the other ones. So Australia didn't believe that if there was to be a brokering activity outside of Australia, that we would need to control that because we would rely upon their controls. A significant number, not all, but a significant number of those FCL countries do not have the new type of controls that we've just introduced, or let alone the American ones. So there's a significant, and the part section 10B where it talks about timeframes and when the extraterritorial controls will expire, they're also not reflected within any US controls. And there's no presumption of denial of 126.1 countries or similar. So my question to you is, how likely is it that we are actually, also not we, but it's going to be possible to get someone in the US government to certify to Congress so that Australia and the UK would be able to take advantage of that AUKUS-free licence environment that is the whole purpose behind the amendments? Thank you.
I would say 100% confident. So we've been working with the US and the UK since July last year on negotiating from both the UK, the US and the Australian perspective of how we could meet common thresholds. So they are very much being briefed and across Department of State, Department of Defence, across Department of Commerce, across what our regulations say, what our Act says. They have been in Australia on trilateral consultations where we've been talking about our different acts. We released our amendments to our Act. The UK did and the US all at the same time. It was on all our websites at the same time. So we're very interconnected about what each country is doing to meet kind of an agreed standard for the AUKUS environment. So I have no concerns whatsoever about being certified mid-August.
Hi, Emily and Rosanna. I'm Tom McGorum from Heavy Iron Accelerators here at the ANU, and spent 21 years in the same institution you're at now. So I've seen the challenge from both sides. So I really appreciate the outreach. I'm not a researcher, but I support researchers' access to national research infrastructure, and that's got both obviously a domestic and international dimension. So my question really goes to the work across the Commonwealth on integrating with education and DISA to make sure there's a really coherent whole of government approach. and obviously DFAT is a key part of that too. So education, for example, is hosting the International Conference on Research Infrastructure in Brisbane later this year. So we're really being encouraged, and appropriately so, to engage with international researchers, ensure that researchers overseas are accessing Australian infrastructure. That's obviously extremely good for it. But as part of that, education's also developing the NRI roadmap for the next 5 years. It'll steer the direction of that international, amongst other things, the international collaboration, the aspect, the accessing of Australian research infrastructure by international researchers. So what would give me comfort is that you're talking to Claire Sainsbury at Education, the band one over there, to say, hey, let's make sure that we're really gripped up on that the NRI roadmap reflects the changes to legislation, and that when we engage with education, we can have that confidence that they're working from the same song sheet as you are. I know that work's always hard, and I'm sure it's going on, but I think that's the piece, having left the Commonwealth Government and sitting outside it, they're the bits that always worry me, because there's so much to do.
So in the lead up with the amendments to the Act and regs, we had an interdepartmental committee. So that's kind of an internal Commonwealth arrangement where different departments meet regularly to talk about cutting issues that cut across many portfolios. Education definitely was in the room, as was industry, Treasury, PM&C, because as you rightly say, this is an issue that cuts across Department of Foreign Affairs, Defence. It cuts across various portfolios. One of the recommendations of the review from last year was for DEC to continue to have high-level interdepartmental committees around the work that we're doing. And so I'm quite engaged with, again, AFP, ABF, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and do I think Home Affairs? And Home Affairs also are an important counterpart, but also, we'll probably talk about this further in the panel. We've got colleagues, Ray from industry, who will be here on the panel talking about just how it does cut across and how linked up we are trying to work together. So thank you for that question.
Good morning, Richard Campbell, and I'm representing SME Gateway and also the Australian Industry Defence Network. So I'll give you my very simple question up front, but then about a 30-second story to follow it based on my experience working in a position that engaged with DEC. The simple question is, how much engagement have you done with defence industry in modernising the DEC regime? The slightly longer story, the gentleman to my left here who raised the first question from the floor talked about your role as facilitators versus perhaps some people's view that you might be perceived as gatekeepers. In a previous life, 2 years ago, I was our defence attaché in Turkey, and I saw numerous instances of Australian companies trying to export defence goods to Turkey. One of them was trying to export bis-alloy steel. Bis-alloy steel can be used to make a lot of things, but one of the things it's useful for is armour plate for armoured vehicles. In the review process to determine whether we could export bis-alloy steel to Turkey, I was asked to comment on whether an armoured vehicle produced from that bis-alloy steel could possibly be engaged in a human rights abuse sometime within the next 40 years, which is a ridiculous question to ask someone. It suggested that we were looking for ways to prohibit defence export rather than to facilitate it.
As part of the reforms to the Act, DEC is also undertaking a number of reforms, because I hear what you're saying, a number of reforms to the way we do business. So we're looking at our permit types. Are they fit for purpose? They were fit for purpose in 2012. Maybe they're not for 2024. Whether we need to have project type permits, encapsulating type permits. So we're kind of looking at reviewing that. We're also reviewing the way we engage with other departments and how we seek information and what information we are seeking. So that's kind of a review that we are undertaking, because we're conscious that there are better ways to do business. We need to be a bit more fit for purpose for the needs of industry and research, and we acknowledge that. So that's part of the reform process that we're on at DEC. We've got the kind of the outward-facing work that we've talked about today, but there's also that internal work that we're doing as well.
Thank you. Nicholas Chilton from the Research School of Chemistry here at ANU. Most of the research that myself and my colleagues do will fall under the basic research exemption, which is really nice to see it laid out so clearly in the new legislation. But coming from recently being in the UK, where they have another gotcha, which is the level of the end user controls, which supersedes any basic research exemption. So I haven't heard anything about that today. So I'm just wondering, is there a separate end user that would supersede the basic research exemption?
No.
Great.
Hi, Jasmine Hope at the ANU. I just wanted to ask you a hopefully simple question. How long does it generally take from the application point to getting the permit? Just so I have a clear understanding of how the process works practically.
Jasmine, thanks for your question. Currently, we're negotiating the policy with the US, and they've indicated that an application for the licence-free environment, you're talking about the licence-free environment? For permits currently is approximately, it's in line with the US, which is about 35 days. Yep. So that's our standard target. Yep. The AUKUS? Yeah. So the US has indicated that they will take up to about 60 days to enrol us in the licence-free environment. We're negotiating that at the moment through the policy process with our AUKUS partners. And then once we've defined that, we'll communicate that length of time. Yeah.
I'll just jump in that for non-complex cases, we can usually get them done in 15 days, but 35, so.
Hi, Trudy Thorpe from SAR Professional Services. Just had a question with regards to tangible exports. Has there been consultation with Border Force regarding the integrated cargo system and being able to capture use of any exemptions to sort of prevent them looking for permits?
Yep, we're definitely engaging with ABF and their IT system and how to integrate.
Hi, excuse me. Contabland from Medicines Australia. I just wanted to ask a question about the permits as well. Are they cost recovered when you apply for permits?
They're free.
Okay.
Questions online as well, one relating to SAMS that's just come through. Is there anything in the upcoming SAMS changes that you would say may have implications for the research sector?
Good morning. Changes to SAMS that have implications to the research sector. So I don't know, I might just do a quick call out as to how many people are aware of the SAMS legislation in the room. It's a good spread, that's great. For those that aren't aware of SAMS, SAMS introduces another regulatory function or requirement for certain former defence personnel and Australian citizens or permanent residents that may be seeking to undertake work and or training with foreign countries that are not on the countries list in relation to our legislation. So in terms of SAMS, we only have the Five Eyes countries currently covered under our countries exemption. In relation to impacts to the academic sector, so the SAMS legislation is an individual requirement and it requires individuals to assess whether it will impact them. But essentially, if you are seeking to undertake training, potentially in the academic sector, or if anyone is a former defence person that has not had the expiry job family period applied to them, in which case if they're undertaking work, or training, which is part 2, for any Australian citizen or permanent resident that are seeking to undertake training relating to DCG Goods List Part 1 or the military tactics, techniques or procedures, they may require to submit a request for a foreign work authorisation. So from that perspective, the impact to them won't be that they may require an application. In some circumstances, those applications, well, in most cases, a bit like the deck permits, they'll probably be approved. At the moment, we've received about 800 applications since the program went live on the 6th of May. We haven't denied any as yet. We've granted just under 400 of those applications to date. So it's a difficult question to answer as to whether it will have an impact on individuals, other than certainly encourage people to refer to the SAMS website. So that's at www.defence.gov.au/SAMS. Check the requirements through that website, and if you're unsure, put in a request.
Perfect. So is Anna Maria around? Yeah, have we got any more time, Anna Maria?
There are
great.
more online if you'd like to revert back to online.
All right, Alex, great.
So there seems to be a theme relating to fundamental research exemptions, including obligations regarding record keeping where the fundamental research exemption is used, and how the fundamental research exemption works with the DSGL. So could you use something that is on the DSGL to do fundamental research? Yeah, so just expanding on fundamental research at the moment, and then we have a follow-up question.
Okay, so in regards to record keeping and exemptions, so if you are using fundamental research as an exemption under 10A, you do not need to keep a record of that. If you are using an exemption under 10B and 10C, you do need to keep a record, and all you need to do is keep a record of the goods or services provided and the name of the country that you supplied that good or service to. Now, with the new MAID portal, there will be an option for you to be able to keep your records in our ICT system if you so choose. There's no obligation to do that. You can do it in your own systems, but when you have multiple people using, for example, at university, you might have multiple people using their DCRN to apply for permits. You might want to encourage those researchers to keep those records in one place on our ICT portal.
We also have a question relating to the MAID portal. If Rosanna, maybe you're able to expand. From Matthew in Sydney, if the MAID portal is linked to an individual's MyGov ID, how do universities know which of its researchers have a DEC permit or are AUKUS authorised users? Will universities be able to apply for permits on behalf of its researchers?
Matthew, was it? Yeah, so Matthew, the way the MAID portal is constructed is you can either log in using MyGov ID based on your individual or your entity's email address. And what happens in the MAID portal, it starts tracking all your permits. So from a university's perspective, you'll be able to view a list of your whole history of your permits, how they're tracking, whether they've expired and so forth. Alex, can you just... Was there any other questions on that? I just want to make sure I've covered it all. It was a big one.
How will universities know that someone in their institution is a member of the AUKUS-free environment, and will universities be able to apply on behalf of their researchers?
Yeah, thank you. So the answer is yes. So my understanding is most universities have an export control officer, and that's who we liaise with at Defence Export Controls. Applying for the AUKUS licence-free environment will be on behalf of the university, and you will be able to view AUKUS membership not only for yourself but everybody else that is enrolled in that that list in that community. So we're making that available not only for Australia, but for the US and the UK. So you will understand that universal exemption with regard to if you're sending it as part of that, you will understand who is part of that community across all AUKUS partners.
Thank you. We also have a question from Jamie Schultz in Sydney relating to the export of scientific data. Is scientific data considered the same as exporting goods? So maybe if you could expand on the role of the DSGL and the controls that apply to technologies within it.
Sorry, who was that question from? Jamie?
Jamie Schultz in Sydney.
Yeah, Jamie, I think you really need to look at the DSGL. So I've got my copy here that I take with wherever I go. It is a dense document. It's online. I would have a look at the definitions. It's really important to know what's the tech. Is it DSGL technology? Is it goods? Is it software? What are you wanting to export? And then have a look at the DSGL and have a read, not just whether it's listed or not, but have a look at the control and the decontrol notes, because this is a document that brings together the agreements that all the foreign listed countries who are part of the 4 international regimes agree together should be controlled. Now, nothing gets taken off the DSGL, but things get put on. But decontrol notes are a way for the international community to say, hang on, in 1975, we were really concerned about this technology, but now it's kind of gone mainstream, it's being commercialised, it's being used, to encrypt and provide security on mobile phones and personal data. Maybe it needs to move to a different part of the DSGL. So really just going back to, I suppose, basics. Have a look at the DSGL. It's available online on the Federal Register, www.austlii.com.au. It's available. You can Google search it, find what you're looking for, and read the notes. That's the best starting point.
Thank you. While we're on the DSGL, we have a question from Joe in Queensland. Are there plans to include a searchable DSGL tool or interface as part of the self-assessment?
Yes, it's my dream. Yes, not in release 1, in the lead up to September, but that is definitely something I'm committed to doing, because I do get a lot of questions about the DSGL and how we can kind of break it out a bit more and make it user friendly for people to find what they're working on. So that's definitely something that next horizon. But yes.
Thank you. There's one more question here on the grandfathering arrangements, if you're just able to expand on grandfathering across the 3 exemptions for existing permits.
So the grandfathering provisions relate to Section 10B and Section 10C. So this information is on our Defence Export website, but I suppose the crux of it is if you've got a permit before 1 September, if it's been issued before 1 September and it covers the activity that you're going to be doing for the next couple of years, you don't have to worry about that resupply or that services element. So I've kind of given you a snapshot, but that's basically the grandfathering provision covers. But please, please, please go to our website, have a look at it. It's a really great exemption, but make sure that it fits your purposes and what you're doing.
If we have any more in the room, there is one more online regarding from Tom Dixon in Sydney. Thank you, Tom. If an academic has a foreign work authorisation, how will the institution know and or take advantage of the exemption it could potentially offer when considering an entity level permit application?
From my understanding of the foreign worker authorisation permit process, that's an individual process. So what Tom's kind of saying is, if an individual applies, how will the organisation know? I think if you want to...
Yeah, thank you. The SAMS area is not able to share information with institutions or organisations about who does and doesn't have a foreign work authorisation. That is up to the individuals to share that with organisations. From our engagement so far, most organisations have processes in place now where they are either encouraging people to apply for a foreign work authorisation or ask if they have one in place. So generally speaking, most people are pretty willing to share that information with their employer, noting that many saying that's now a requirement for certain engagements that they've deemed to be necessary to do that. So, so we won't be providing a system similar to those, for example, a security clearance system by which an organisation can check on behalf. That will be up to individuals to provide that information. The other key part to that is an FWA is specific to an arrangement. So there is no blanket FWA. You can't request one for all engagements. They have to be aligned to the specific role and beneficiaries that will be benefiting from that particular work or training.
Hi, John Byron from QUT. Emily and Rosanna have heard me ask this question before, but I'm going to have another crack at it. It's great that the IDCs are continuing, and we're very happy to hear about that. But from the point of view of a researcher involved in international collaboration, all of these regimes are pretty much all of a piece, whether it's UFIT, SAMS, DEC, Customs Act, whatever. You know, from their point of view, it's just the government. And it would really, while we're talking about holy grail stuff that's online, it would be really good if there's a self-assessment portal that covers all of those things where people can find their way, just saying, I do this collaboration, is there anything I need to be worried about?
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, thank you. We'll take that on.
Do I need to lobby Jim Chalmers about this for money or? No comment from the front.
From Sam's perspective, I agree as well. So, yeah, look, anything that makes the customer journey easier, I think, is really important. Achieving that sometimes is more complex than either needs to be or we perceive it to be, but I think it's important that we're listening to feedback from the users and understanding what they need. The challenge for us is that can we actually implement it and how can we implement it? So without that input, we don't know about it necessarily, so keep that coming.
Thank you.
All right, well, I think, Anna Maria, if you're comfortable, that'll be the end, yeah? Great. Thank you.
Thank you. You beat me to it. I was going to ask for a round of applause for all of the effort you've taken, not just today, but in the lead up to today, and for so comprehensively listening to the sector, both the higher education and research sector as well as industry. I remember, and of course success has many authors, so I'm pleased we were all able to come together. I remember when we first started this discussion, it felt like two different sectors who really didn't know a lot about each other or only bits about it, and I think we've very much moved from that. I suspect come 1st of September, based on the questions we've heard today, there'll be a few more creases to iron out and things to work through, but it's a transition we all need to go through. So thank you for your goodwill. Again, please join me in thanking Rosanna, Emily, and I was about to call you Sam, but it's not. Thank you. We're a little bit early, which is wonderful. It means you have more time for morning tea. We'll reconvene, which is being hosted in the Jager room where you were earlier this morning. We'll reconvene at 11:25 for our participants online. Please grab yourself a cuppa as well, and we'll see you at 11:25. Thank you. Welcome back. I hope you had an opportunity to chat with colleagues, old and new. Can't stop the chatting, don't want to stop the chatting, but have to stop the chatting. All right, we'll make a start. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to chair a panel, it's not afternoon, this morning, with representatives from the research and government and the national security sectors in Australia. Each speaker will give us a brief overview of their area, and then we'll have a facilitated discussion and an opportunity for questions from the audience in the Shine Dome and online. So do note down your questions if they come up during the brief introductory panellist talks. We'll explore a number of things, but things like how will AUKUS, the shifting geopolitics and national security environment, impact how Australia does scientific research? How can we strengthen and diversify our international research collaboration with other countries while managing national security risks, having heard about the exemptions to the legislation, including the 25 countries on the foreign countries list? So to get things started, I'd like to first invite Professor Tim Senden, Director of the School of Physics at the Australian National University, and in doing so, thank Tim for his insights as he's been navigating the new legislation and the regulations at the ANU and in physics. So over to you, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Maria. Appreciate the invitation today. Thank you. And to Lauren too, thank you. First of all, let me acknowledge all First Nations peoples, whether they're in person or online. As a research manager, an academic at heart, I have to say that the engagement that we've had with the DEC team over the last 6 months has been fabulous. Few engagements, I have to say, whether they be with industry or with government, have been so productive and so valued. So really a great congratulations to the DEC team. You've prepared us well for this discussion. When I look at this topic, I can't help but put my physical chemist mind on and see it as a framework for the understanding of the dynamics of partnerships at all levels. And what we're talking about today are some of the mechanisms we're putting in place to manage the dynamics of those partnerships, understanding that partnerships are where we establish a mutually beneficial relationship for a purpose. Look, and the tension has been already stated well by Ivan in his opening remarks about the open research in well, I have to say, it's always been a contested world. Maybe at the present we're thinking about it more often, but it's never been a fair and open world. That was the subject of a workshop here in the Academy last year, very well attended and richly debated. It was a great staging for what we're doing today. And I really thank Sean for his comments and Jamie online for the comments around postgraduate research. It's a complex space, and I think the UFIT engagement we had really a couple of years ago shed a light on how complex universities are and the advantages of open research. I mean, I was thinking about Nigel's comments about asymmetric advantage, and there's a different asymmetric advantage that I'd like you to think about in this context, and that is for the roughly 2% of spending we contribute to the world seen in open research, we get roughly 50 times the value back. Now that's a real asymmetric advantage, but it's not what you might think of as the right asymmetry. It's an intellectual asymmetry, and when I hear the phrase, we punch above our weight, I always laugh to myself because in a research context, we punch above our weight because we're standing on the very broad shoulders of a global community. You know, so I think it's important to put that in context. That's where the tension comes from that Ivan outlined. And I think it's a productive tension. It's one that's worth discussing more. And to the DEC team again, thank you again for your engagement and recognition that this is an ongoing and evolving discussion. This is not something that we set in time and walk away from. Universities need to lean into this continuously and together. Section 10A is a very interesting topic, and we will no doubtly have many questions about that, not only today but in an ongoing way. It's very complex. It does illustrate how complex universities are. And at the moment, from my perspective, there's a risk, a real risk, that there will be over-censorship from the university's perspective. So at one level, partnerships are about setting good policy. At another level, they're setting good legislation. But in between, there's a piece that I think we still haven't yet explored thoroughly in this country. We have isolated discussions, but we don't do governance well. So legislation and policy sit either side, but governance is the thing that really grows partnerships at a university and a government level. And we need to explore that. Nigel alluded to some work being done in DSTG, and I thoroughly look forward to that open consultation. Thank you.
I'll now invite Ray Marcelo to the stage. Ray is from the International Trade and National Security Division of the Department of Industry, Science and Resources. His team works across a portfolio to support policy development and engage with economic and geostrategic risks. Ray also brings a background from DFAT.
I certainly do. Thanks, Anna Maria, and good morning, everybody. Let me associate myself as well with the acknowledgement of country. Really, I wanted to just reflect briefly on this morning and what Tim said, and say this about international collaboration in the civilian space. So DISA supports scientific collaboration through our own program funding. The department also obviously has R&D programs, and there's a review underway now. But the message really is that international collaboration is essential. There's no turning away from international collaboration because of the more contested and worsening geopolitical environment, because we need those collaborations for our prosperity, for our continued economic growth. In some ways, a lot like the way we think about foreign investment, we can't expand our economy without foreign investment, but we do that by being more aware of the risks. And so international collaboration, research security, it's really, the other side of that is national security. And so in some ways, this morning you've heard Ivan talking about it as a tension perhaps. In some ways, the way that we like to think about it is really two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. You need to have international collaboration, but you also need to be aware of the vulnerabilities that arise from that kind of collaboration. And so those vulnerabilities have been set out very clearly by national security agencies. You heard the reference to Director General of ASIO talking about real threats from foreign intelligence services, real threats from espionage. It's a basic level of awareness in some ways that sometimes, and when we talk to industry, when we talk to scientists who engage with our portfolio, there's a level of awareness that probably needs to lift, in particular when it comes to dealing with a foreign partner. DFAT will touch on that in some ways with their foreign arrangement scheme, but really what we see is when we encourage international collaboration is to encourage researchers to go through those steps, go through the due diligence and understand the risks and whether those risks are things that can be mitigated so you can get those benefits from collaboration. Because ultimately the international space and international work is really about the benefit to you as a researcher, as a company, and then being aware of any vulnerabilities that arise from those kinds of collaborations. And it comes really to, well, I'll come back to our portfolio and just to finish my brief remarks. When we go through sponsoring scientific collaboration, our team will go through a whole series of due diligence checks that in some ways researchers aren't necessarily privy to, but what we would like to do is get to yes. So our thinking is to say, how do we get to yes to support that collaboration? Because we know that the reason why someone has come to a government agency to do a collaboration is because there is benefit. So our thinking is to say, how do we support this program? How can they get to yes? And that's really the process that we will go through, the thinking that we will go through when it comes to fostering collaboration. The last point really I'll make is about information, and information that government holds and information that perhaps an applicant or industry doesn't know. It came up in a conversation here at the ANU at the National Security College, actually, and I think the challenge that that conference raised with people was to say, how can government share more about what it knows with industry? Now, I think government is trying to find ways to do that. And so, as you've seen with very big investments in our portfolio, for example, with PsiQuantum, that's a large investment, and that involved government being ready to share information about our concerns on risk. Now, how do we do that across multiple sectors, different companies? How does government share information in a way that gives companies or an applicant a greater sense of certainty about their project? And that's the challenge for government. I'm not going to say it's resolved. In fact, it's an ongoing challenge that we don't have that governance, actually, that Tim was talking about, to bring in companies so they are more aware of the risks and that they can go forward and get to yes. So I'll leave my remarks at that, but looking forward to the discussion. Thanks, Anna Maria.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks so much. May I please invite Katie Hamilton, the Director of Complex Assessments in the Foreign Arrangements branch, who leads a team that assesses subnational foreign arrangements for consistency with Australia's foreign policy in consultation with whole-of-government partners. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you, Anna Maria. Good morning, everyone. I'll just start by associating myself with Ray's comments this morning about the benefits of collaboration and also the importance of due diligence and knowing your partner. That's also fundamental to our work in the Foreign Arrangements branch. At DFAT, we know that growing education and research partnerships with key markets in the region are fundamental to Australia's foreign policy outcomes. We work in a rapidly changing and complex strategic environment that presents challenges for the sector. Australia's attractive, world-class education system and research environment provides enormous opportunities, but it can be vulnerable to risk and interference. It's therefore important that government and researchers work together to protect our Australian talent and assets, like our cutting-edge research, IP, and academic freedoms. In recognition of the value of Australia's university sector, Australian public universities are captured under the Foreign Arrangements Scheme. The first of its kind internationally, the scheme is generating international interest as an effective countering foreign interference measure and is informing the approach taken by others, and not just like-mindeds. It also plays an important role in the broader architecture of national resilience mechanisms that we've heard a bit about earlier this morning. So including the Foreign Influence Transparency Scheme, the University Foreign Interference Task Force, and the Foreign Investment Review Board. You've also heard, obviously, this morning from Defence Export Controls, and after me, you'll hear from my colleague in the Australian Sanctions Office. In many ways, these schemes are complementary, and in some instances intersect with the Foreign Arrangements Scheme. At its heart, the scheme celebrates and promotes Australian excellence overseas. It acknowledges that states, territories, local governments and universities play an incredibly important role in advancing Australia's interests globally. The scheme provides transparency of the breadth of Australian engagement. This in turn speaks to our values and distinguishes us from competitors in our region. The scheme also ensures robust and resilient and risk-aware international engagement that is consistent with Australia's foreign policy settings. The purpose of the scheme is not to curtail or limit academic collaboration, but instead to celebrate Australian talent and our university sector and the breadth of Australia's international engagement, while reducing opportunities for risk or foreign interference. Our aim in the Foreign Arrangements branch is to support robust and risk-aware international collaboration. Robust arrangements that are consistent with Australia's foreign policy settings, deliver outcomes for Australia and for the university sector, and work to reduce risks. Some of the risks that we see when we're looking at foreign arrangements that are notified under the scheme include reputational risk to the institution or the researcher, potential inconsistency with other regulatory regimes, such as sanctions, risks around collaboration in particularly sensitive areas, such as critical minerals or critical technologies, dual-use research, and that can be a lot broader than I think some of us imagine. So much research can be used for different purposes, and you don't always necessarily know what your partner plans to use the research for. Theft of assets, IP, research or technology. We also look at the drafting of arrangements, so looking at whether there's an expiry date, whether it's clear which legal system would apply if there was a dispute. So these are all the risks, all risks that we consider in assessing arrangements under the scheme. As the scheme matures, so does our engagement with stakeholders, including universities and researchers. We work with universities to engage on foreign policy settings, identify risks, and develop mitigation measures where necessary. The Foreign Arrangements branch also draws on expertise from across Commonwealth Government agencies, including the National Intelligence Community, to assist in identifying, managing, and advising on risks that pose security concerns and may be inconsistent with Australia's national interests or foreign policy settings. Strategically aligning research programs to foreign policy settings maximises outcomes for the research sector and for Australia. Working together, including through the lens of the Foreign Arrangements Scheme, we can continue to build risk-aware partnerships in markets of strategic significance that promote and protect our valuable assets, research, and innovative technologies for the benefit of all Australians. Thank you.
Thanks, Kaindi. Our next speaker is Christopher Kaindi, an Assistant Director at the Australian Sanctions Office, which sits within DFAT. Christopher is the Permits Lead at the Sanctions Office, where he coordinates permit applications and reviews complex cases. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Before I give an overview of the Australian sanctions framework, I think and how it intersects with the Defence Trade Control Act, I'll echo what Tim, Ray and Kate have said about international collaboration and the governance frameworks that universities should have in order to ensure that they manage the risks that they may face when it comes to sanctions and providing dual-use goods and technology to foreign entities. Now, the sanctions framework is it interacts with the defence export controls, but in some instances it appears to be a wet blanket when it comes to providing a permit. The way things work in this instance is that a defence permit is obtained, and in some instances a sanctions permit would also be required. And the feedback that we have got in the past is that the sanctions permit are quite difficult to obtain and are not permissive in this kind of environment, especially when it comes to research and development. But I think when we frame this question in the context of the breadth of sanctions and what sanctions are meant to, what the purpose of sanctions are, we may understand how that interaction fits in when it comes to certain countries or certain entities. The breadth of sanctions, Australia's sanctions, is in response to the shifting geopolitical and national security environment. The sanctions landscape has evolved and expanded significantly since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The scale and speed of sanctions measures applied against Russia have been unprecedented. For example, Australia has sanctioned more than 1,100 individuals or entities over the past 18 months. And that represents a 500% increase on pre-invasion sanctions listing. Now, the Defence Trade Controls Act strikes a balance between protecting Australia's national security and supporting economic prosperity and research collaboration. The Australian sanctions framework interacts with the shifting geopolitical landscape in several ways. Autonomous sanctions are punitive measures not involving the use of armed force, which the government has decided to impose as a matter of foreign policy. The situation that autonomous sanctions may be responding to include the grave repression of human rights and democratic freedoms, or the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, or their means of delivery, or internal or international conflict. Now, the intentions behind sanctions are to limit the adverse consequences of the situation of international concern by denying access to military goods or technology, to seek to influence those responsible for giving rise to the situation of international concern to modify their behavior, and to penalize those responsible. Now, when you're thinking of your research and how you would want to share your research with a partner in a foreign country, the things that we in the Sanctions Office would like you to consider as part of your due diligence and risk assessment, what the purpose of the research is, who the end user is, and whether the end user is a designated person or entity, or whether the user is in a sanctioned country. The reason for that is that there are prohibitions under autonomous sanctions and the United Nations security sanctions that restrict the dealing with designated persons or entities, or providing sanction, export, or services that may apply to science research and dual use. The sanctions framework provides that a person commits an offense if they provide a sanction service without a permit. A sanctioned service, for example, in the research sector, would include providing technical assistance or training to a designated individual or entity, and that assistance or training is provided in relation to a sanctioned supply, a military activity, or the manufacture or use of export sanctioned goods. A sanctioned service may include, but is not limited to, technical assistance or training, a financial service, or financial assistance if the service is provided in relation to a sanctioned supply, a military activity, or the manufacture, maintenance, or use of export sanctioned goods. Now, I think from the above, I think it's easy to see from the sanction context how the exemptions under the Defence Control Act may not necessarily excuse the export of sanctioned goods or the provision of assets for the purpose of research or collaboration without a sanctions permit. And for this reason, we'd ask you to exercise reasonable precaution, due diligence, and contact the Australian Sanctions Office if you believe with reasonable certainty that the goods that you would be providing or the assets that you would be providing to a partner entity may be sanctioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. And may I now invite Dr. Nick Johnson, the Executive Director of the Research Partnerships at the National Health and Medical Research Council. Nick leads a branch that's responsible for developing and delivering the NHMRC strategic and health priorities. His team works closely with the Department of Health and Aged Care to deliver the Medical Research Future Fund and improve harmonisation between it and the NHMRC's work. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the invitation to come and speak today. Also want to acknowledge that we're meeting on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land. Maybe a slight change of pace from me coming to talk to you as a funder of research and our perspectives, I guess. I've just got a couple of short slides. So I guess this issue around the defence trades controls is relevant for us as a funder, but we're slightly peripheral to that, I guess, in which we're not the regulator, and so I won't be speaking about those aspects of it. So I guess the key two messages I wanted to impart today are around NHMRC's view about encouraging international collaborations and the importance of it and what we're doing to invest in that, and responsibilities for recipients of our funding. So we'll just move to the first slide there. Am I progressing those with the buttons? Oops. I can control it myself. Good. So this is the current corporate plan for NHMRC. So those that aren't aware, the National Health and Medical Research Council is the Australian Government's main agency for funding health and medical research. We hand out around $900 million in competitive health and medical research grant funding each year, and we also support the Department of Health to administer the Medical Research Future Fund, which is an additional about $500 million in grants, and a large amount of that is administered through the NHMRC. But NHMRC is more than that. We also have regulatory roles in the use of human embryos in research. We produce a number of important national codes around the conduct of research, the use of animals in research and how human research is conducted. And we also produce guidelines and guidance for public health, including things such as our national dietary guidelines and safe drinking water, and there's a whole suite of them. We also work with partners in addition to the Department of Health, such as Cancer Australia, to administer funding. But one of our strategic priorities on this slide, which is possibly hard to read, but in our list of strategic priorities is international collaboration and global partners. And so we do quite a bit to enable that through targeted collaborative research opportunities, but also our policies enable recipients of NHMRC funding to use that money overseas and to foster international collaborations. So we have an international engagement strategy, and it has 4 priorities that set out our objectives there, and they're listed at the bottom. So firstly, we do want to prioritise collaborations in our region, and we do a number of initiatives that fosters that. We want to ensure that what we invest in internationally are shared global priorities and are harmonised with NHMRC's strategic objectives. We want to use international collaboration to build researcher capability and capacity and to tap into that, the global knowledge. And finally, we want to foster those international networks. And one of the most important ways we can bring technology to Australia for things like clinical trials in rare diseases is to participate directly in these trials. This is often the best way to get new technology into the clinic and into policy making, is to be fostering those collaborations directly. We have a number of collaborative international schemes that we run that funds the Australian participation with international partners that is either multilateral or bilateral arrangements. So, for example, we participate in Horizon Europe, where we'll fund Australian participation in the funding provided through the EU. We participate with eAsia, which is a collaboration, a multilateral collaboration in our region in East Asia for all science and technology. And of course, we focus there on the health and medical topics. We partner with the Global Alliance for Chronic Diseases, which is a range of first and also high wealth countries and low and middle income countries, with the aim of lifting the health of those low and middle countries in relation to chronic diseases, and also with a focus on Australian, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health. And we have a number of other bilateral relationships in place, including with Canada and with Japan and with a range of others. So this shows you just a snapshot of NHMRC funding of grants, and this is not just in our targeted collaborative calls, but across the entirety of our grant program, of how our money is used with offshore by international partners and with collaborators. As then you'll see, which is probably unsurprising, that the largest amount of collaboration we see with NHMRC grants is with the US and then with the UK and New Zealand, and then with decreasing amounts with other collaborators you see on the screen there. So NHMRC really recognises this is absolutely essential to fostering health in Australia by supporting directly and enabling this international collaboration. So we're really keen to see that that is continued. The final thing I guess I wanted to talk about was what does that mean in practice for the recipients of the grant? So this is my final slide. NHMRC provides our funding to NHMRC-approved administering institutions. We have a funding agreement with those institutions, and there is a process those institutions have to go through to be qualified and certified, and there's a range of issues to do with governance. And those institutions are universities, hospitals, and also a range of independent medical research institutes. Now, it's an obligation on all those administering institutes to comply with NHMRC's range of policies and national guidelines, but also it must be compliant with any applicable federal, state and territory and local legislation. And that includes, and we specifically list this in our funding agreement, that administering institutions must ensure that the research funded by NHMRC is compliant with Defence Trade Controls legislation, but also with the guidelines to counter foreign interference of the UFIT process. We do have a range of powers to ensure that happens, even though we aren't the direct regulators. We do monitor on an annual basis our administering institutions and do a compliance report with them to seek to identify their level of compliance. And there's a range of actions we can take if there are concerns with that compliance, and they can range from withholding some funding or requiring a condition of funding for particular grants, through to, I guess, some more extreme outcomes, which would be to terminate a funding agreement for an entire grant, or even for the institute to lose its administering institution status and to no longer be eligible for NHMRC funding. This is as a last resort, and we work very closely with institutions where there is a problem with compliance to help uplift and enable them to continue to receive NHMRC's funding. So I will leave my remarks there, but just to reiterate that NHMRC sees that the role of us funding participation internationally has not changed, and we continue to run those schemes, and the funding will continue to be available, and we think it's very important from a strategic perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. I'll move over to the lectern, but in the meantime, could I invite Emily Hall back to the stage to join the panel? Pop into my seat. Thanks. So we've got about 30 minutes for questions from the audience here in person and online. I have a few I'd like to ask myself, and I'm happy to kick off, but I don't want to discourage any audience questions. We are here for you. One of the key motivations for the Australian Academy of Sciences involvement in bridging the dialogue, strengthening the dialogue and strengthening the legislation and regulations is to enable the research sector's interests and needs to be heard, and we heard earlier that that is very much being received. So this is a further opportunity to do that. And really to, as we move towards the 1st of September and onwards, to avoid what's often referred to as the chilling effect, or that unintended consequence of people not engaging in some collaborations and some scientific research because it looks too hard, it feels or seems prohibitive, when in fact there are efforts being made. So that's not the case. It's more of a how can we reach yes, which we have heard a lot today. So we really want to avoid that, simply because the research the sector does is far too important and contributes to the national interest for us to compromise it in any significant way. So pop your hand up, or somebody's going to tell me about online questions in the audience. Alex, no? Who's written none there yet? Okay, I might get started. Tim, could I go to that avoiding self-censorship issue? You raised it in your opening comments. From your perspective, where you're sitting, what do you see as the issues researchers are grappling with when it comes to security awareness and managing their risks in conducting their work. Have you seen examples of where this is working well, or where organisations, or perhaps within the ANU, where you are pivoting or making some changes that are positive and facilitatory? And can you share those with us?
Yeah, thank you, Anna Maria. Look, there's two parts to that question that I'll summarise briefly. One is the policies we put in place to implement the UFIT guidelines, which are, I have to say, extremely good guidelines that were well co-designed. But there's a tendency, if you don't lean into and look at these guidelines as evolving, dynamic structures, then universities may well just put in policy that is set and forget, and I think that's when you start to see creep and over-censorship at a policy level. One of the issues at the lowest level with the research, or at the base level with researchers, is that there's a bit of self-censorship in that we haven't really, in many universities at least, and possibly in mine as well, rolled out that common sense approach to how engagement occurs, how partnerships develop, and we all know how to develop collaborations. We know that they should be mutual and fair on both sides. And so I think we just have to activate that. It's a nuanced message. It's a communication strategy that managers like myself can develop. And I think that's part of the solution, is just to make it a common sense approach to engagement. And the analogy I always use for my colleagues is to consider WHS. There's no question that when we walk into a laser lab in physics, we are very aware of the safety of ourselves and of others in using these devices. And so, that's a common sense approach that's become intuitive in our daily work. And I think that's the sort of lens we need to put over these new amendments.
Thanks, Tim. I'd like to ask about and this is directed to Ray and Katie, but others should feel free to jump in, the intersection between critical technology policy and national security. Both of you touched on that in your opening remarks. I think as a sector, we've been encouraged and excited by things like the National Quantum Strategy and other critical technologies, and ways in which the directions this country's going in terms of enabling us to participate in some of those areas. What does that intersection look like? What are you doing at your interface, at your desk, to enable it to continue whilst being aware of the DEC?
Maybe I might start because our department publishes the critical technology strategy, and our minister, Ed Husick, is the digital minister. And so I won't go into the DEC element, because in some ways it's been quite well defined today, but the question is really about this intersection between national security and critical tech. Let me answer that a couple of ways. One from a geopolitical perspective. And so countries around the world, including China, identified critical technology as a strategic part of their national power many years ago, so over 15 years ago, even earlier actually. So technology has been clearly identified by partners, rivals in the competitive space as part of their national power for many years. So it's not just an intersection, it's a deliberate identification that technology has obviously dual use capabilities, but developing a technology sector has economic and strategic benefit. So it would be crazy really for Australia not to recognise that. That's the one thing. Our critical tech sector and work has identified those technologies that Australia will try and work on. And there's been, just in the past year alone, if you look at the effort that's been put into quantum, into developing safe and responsible use of AI, into batteries, all of those elements will have a national security element, in the sense that there is a dual use element with some of those technologies, but also, for example, take AI. The national security element of AI, from a user perspective, from a public perspective, is really about whether the technology will cause harm. Now, It's not quite a national security issue in the traditional sense, but what we've seen in the past 6 months alone is harmful examples of technology affecting the general population, fake images, that kind of stuff. There's concerns about electoral interference from AI. These are all national security issues in the broadest sense. And so technology just has vectors and vulnerabilities that just by nature countries have to think about. And our role, and the reason why DISA even has a national security area now, is because we recognise that across the portfolio there are vulnerabilities in those sectors that we are responsible for developing. Vulnerabilities that we can only really address by engaging with the national security community. And I know DFET's mentioned the national intelligence community, and we'll do the same. We draw on insights from the national security community to try and help policy making, because ultimately our goal is to harness the technology for our national benefit. Now, in quantum, you've seen the ambitions set out by the government with one company in particular, but more broadly, there's a quantum strategy. And then in AI, we are developing a policy on safe and responsible use. So all of those things have vulnerabilities that if we don't address them, we go headfirst into potential disaster. So really, it's just about being aware of those risks as we try and get the benefits from these technologies.
Thanks, Ray. I might just add to that with a little bit about how we implement the foreign arrangement scheme when it comes to the intersection of critical tech and national security issues. We take a triage approach, so we'll look at all arrangements and filter out those that don't present potential foreign policy risk. And then when we come to the sort of group of arrangements that potentially do present some foreign policy risk, we'll look at three sort of broad factors. We'll look at the country, we look at the foreign entity, and we look at the subject matter. And we don't have any list of subject matter or countries or entities that we can't have any engagement with. It's not like we look at, so we're certainly interested if we see that the subject matter crosses over with the critical technology list, but it's not like there's anything on there that we say, okay, there's definitely no international engagement on those technologies. It's really a case-by-case analysis, and where we do see the subject matter intersecting with the critical technology list, we'll consult DISA, we'll consult other agencies. In DFAT, we're not the experts on those technologies, so we consult our partners to better understand first how we might be able to enable the collaboration to continue if we do see risk. So as others have spoken about, our goal really is to enable that collaboration to continue. And so quite often there are instances in which we'll work with the university to put in place some additional mitigations to enable that collaboration to continue. But yeah, I guess the intersection between critical technology and national security, there's not sort of a list of things that there's no collaboration allowed on. It's more a matter of looking at each arrangement on a case-by-case basis and seeing how those benefits and risks balance out.
Thank you. Before I go to my next question, I'd like to check if there are questions from the audience. Yep. First here. Go on.
Thanks, everyone. My name is Shashank Ramakrishna from SAR Professional Services. We work in the advisory space, particularly around export controls and building compliance programs for a range of clients across government, industry and academia as well. What we find is a challenge is capacity and resourcing. I guess, we've spoken a lot about the permitting or authorization process here, but it's a larger compliance program that I guess organisations need to have in place. Defence have sought to, I guess, assist the capacity component with the Defence Industry Development Strategy and the subsequent grants program, where I guess small to medium enterprises can access funding and support through Defence to help, I guess, build some of those compliance programs where necessary. Is there anything that either DISA or Defence are doing, I guess, to specifically address that gap with academia? I guess from what we see across the broad range of client bases, that the scope of the problem is very similar across industry and academia. It's the scale. When we look at academia, obviously the number of entities, be it individuals or external parties as in terms of organisations and whatnot, is significantly higher than that of industry. So I guess one part of the community in complying with the government's requirements are getting support. Just not sure where the other potentially bigger part of the community is getting that support.
Emily, Ray?
Kick off. So as part of the Defence Trade Controls Act, it's reviewed every 5 years. And so I should have mentioned this earlier, the amendments will be reviewed in 3 years' time as well. So we're looking for feedback from industry and the higher education sector on what's working and what's not. One of the recommendations that came out of the review that took place late last year was providing an uplift in the education and accreditation of export officers or people who want to be export officers, whether in small to medium businesses or in the higher education sector. So we're looking at how we can build that capacity up, whether it's through training programs, whether it's through accredited processes to be qualification to be an export control, to help build that security apparatus around organisations. I would also do another plug for DISP, the Defence Industry Security Program. It's a great way to build up your capacity, whether you're in private sector or in the higher education sector, about awareness about security, how you can build those governance and compliance arrangements that are so important. We have a higher education working group that was meeting twice a month in the lead up to the Act and the regs, and I think we'll be looking to be meeting monthly now that the regs are finalised. But we'll be looking at what kind of support we can give specifically around compliance. So that's something that we're kind of turning our mind to at the moment.
Anything to add?
Look, just because you asked about industry, I think because we don't have such a defined responsibility as administering the DSGL, what I'd say is that our programs that involve international collaboration, you won't be surprised to know that they are aligned with Australian government policy. So you won't find industry programs, science industry, or even resources sector programs that are inconsistent with Australian government foreign policy. We deliberately align our program guidelines, our funding with those policies. Now, your question was really about the compliance gap or the capacity, was it? So I'm not aware of our agency giving the kind of support to applicants on accessing our programs. But if you are, then please let me know. I think we don't have similar burdens, but I'd welcome any input from you and your members and your partners if our agency has issues for compliance. Thanks.
Thank you. Next question.
Thanks very much. Paul Harris from the Innovative Research Universities Network, and just thank you to the Academy and all of our colleagues from government. It's a rare opportunity, I think, for us to engage with all of these different parts of government in one go, so we really appreciate that. I guess my question is about, we talk a lot, and we have been talking a lot about sort of managing the downside risk of international research collaboration and the vulnerabilities. Ray talked about finding new ways to kind of share information about vulnerabilities and risk. But following on from Tim, I wanted to sort of flip that around and think about how we might work with you on the opportunities as well. And it strikes me, thinking across Defence, DISA, DFAT, the funding agencies, all these different parts of government are sitting on huge amounts of information about where Australian researchers are engaging internationally. And I wonder how we might use that and share that more effectively. And I also wonder if, from your seat in government, you're seeing areas where we're underdone or we're not engaged where we should be. We've just done a piece of work with our universities looking at collaboration with Japan. We have amazing collaboration with Japan in health and medical research. So, and credit to NHN and MRC for supporting that. But I think we can see patterns of collaboration. We can see areas where we're probably underdone in terms of our research and innovation collaboration with key partners internationally. So I guess from a university point of view, I think we have a better understanding of kind of what government wants to see less of. But I wanted to take the opportunity to ask each of you from your perspective, what would you like to see more of?
What a great question to our very own interdepartmental committee right here on stage.
Thanks, Paul. It's a great question because I think and I do want to emphasise again, it really is about looking for opportunity but while being aware of risks. Again, just a little bit like my previous answer, we want collaboration in those areas where Australian foreign policy has identified opportunity. So Southeast Asia, Japan, ROK, Brazil, because they're hosting the G20. So these are country priorities in some of our portfolio's science programs. Within Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand. So these areas are underdone because the government has said Southeast Asia is underdone in our international collaboration. And so while I think we were speaking in the sidelines, but you said Japan, big collaborator, China, a big collaborator. Those areas are clearly where the sector has found opportunity. We also have a China collaboration fund. We have an India collaboration fund. But in some ways, I don't know if there are opportunities outside of those priorities that we've identified that no one's funding. And so if someone says there are great opportunities in Belgium, we'll say, well, I'm really sorry, but Europe's not a foreign policy priority for science. So it's a question of aligning our program funding with, as I was saying before, international policy priorities. That's my contribution to the answer, Anna Maria.
Tim, I think you wanted to add something, and then I'll come to Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And maybe in my opening remarks, I might have expanded on what I meant by governance. I think to a large extent, we're missing a piece, a structure or an entity that sits between universities and government, which can be that trusted space to share some of that intel back and forth as it aligns with national policy, foreign policy. So I think that there's that piece, and it may not be an entity that's for all universities, but it might be a one-on-one relationship. But it's an important part, and I think it's missing in our landscape. Some universities have things that look like that partnership, and I guess that's what we're talking about, where there's really that beneficial and mutual exchange of information in a trusted way. So I think I'm trying to say something very delicately that we don't have in Australia. And when I addressed Nigel's comments, his opening remarks, I think, there is a piece that could be done. I'm not sure who leads it, but I think it has to be co-designed.
Yeah, and maybe just to give the perspective from a funding agency, I guess, so NHMRC, the majority of our funding is what we refer to as investigator-initiated, meaning we want people to bring their best ideas and we'll fund based on excellence according to published assessment criteria. And we're agnostic as to whether that involves international collaboration or not, but often we'll find great research does. And so our job really is to remove the barriers that could prevent that collaboration. And as you saw from the statistics I provided, the vast majority of that international collaboration is already with our AUKUS partners. So we don't necessarily need targeted priority funding to further boost that collaboration. So we probably focus in other areas where there's unmet need. We have a limited budget in doing that targeted approach. So I guess that's why we've established an international engagement strategy with those priorities to help underpin those conversations we have. So we seek multilateral partnerships over bilateral because we just see that's a better way to gain greater global collaborations, for example. We do want to prioritise, as Ray was saying, investment in the region over other parts of the world. And we want to ensure that they're focused on Australia's health and medical research priorities, so infectious diseases, tropical disease, the impacts of on health of climate change and taking a One Health perspective. So some of these are some of the priorities, but also flagged in my original remarks about rare conditions, rare cancers. And Australia, as a small country, is difficult to conduct clinical trials with a small patient group and number of participants. So it's very important that we boost those global networks to address some of those rare conditions. So that's some of the ways we think about how to prioritise that international engagement.
Thank you. Yes.
Just to add quickly, one of the great benefits and goals of the Foreign Arrangement Scheme is greater transparency in subnational foreign arrangements. So you can look online at the public register on which all arrangements that have been notified and deemed in scope of the scheme are listed, and that gives a good sense of where engagement is. The only caveat to that is with universities, the scheme only covers universities, foreign universities that are not considered to have institutional autonomy from the government. So that definitely skews where partnerships are with in terms of the public register. But we see that transparency piece as a really key part of the scheme. And I think, so our scheme is also currently undergoing a legislative review. And one of the questions that we would hope might be considered in that review is how we share information that we are given under the scheme, because at the moment the legislation is very restrictive in how we can share information, so there's not really much we can do with that data that we're gathering. So it will be interesting to see if there are recommendations that come from the legislative reviewer in terms of enabling us to use that information in different ways.
Great opportunity. Alex, are there any questions online? No, not yet. Another one on the floor? Yeah, just here.
Firstly, thanks, Nick, for plugging rare diseases and rare cancers. With a family with 2 of those on board, we're extremely grateful that there's advocates in government that really understand that statistical challenge that getting drugs on the PBS and so on face when they don't have access to the same statistics and knowledge base that things like heart disease and more common diseases do. So thank you for your efforts there. To the question, though, of how someone in industry or research gets integrated advice on all of the things that are represented by the people in front of us, I think that's the core of the user experience. I wonder if the National Cybersecurity Centre is one example of a relevant model where there's an integrated trusted centre for accessing government on an operational basis. So I know that then as a researcher or someone providing access to a Singaporean company, for example, to come and do testing in Australia, I can go to and with confidence know that I've touched on the defence export controls, the foreign interference problems, the sanctions issues, and really make that journey as easy as possible. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre has been engaging, obviously, in the cyber domain with industry for now, and its predecessors, going on more than a couple of decades. Not saying that's the cut and paste solution, but maybe there's something in there to draw upon. I think people need that access to operational advice, but they need to know it's integrated. They need to know they don't have to go from shop front to shop front, and that really builds confidence. And I think to Tim's point about where's that trusted space, I wonder if it's in some kind of whole of government hub with an industry presence and an academic presence on its board or operationally there, not just a policy outfit, but and actually operationally useful advice. I just wonder if that's a model to look at.
Thank you very much. Look, that's a very good question. But I'll start off by saying there's a limited scope for having a centralized portal where you can access all all relevant advice from each of our government agencies. The reason for that is that we operate under different legislative frameworks. However, speaking from the sanctions perspective, we do publish guidance notes on our website, which we hope would be very useful for applicants, and different sectors. I think Kate's team does the same thing, and maybe that's one portal you could, or different portals you could call upon to gather that kind of information or the advice that you would be looking for.
Maybe, thanks. I think your ambition for integrated advice is one we all share. It is a bit elusive, I think, to have a single way to do it, because even just taking science collaboration as something that I'm more familiar with, that's possibly an area where we might be able to find a model of governance. But I guess the only assurance I can give at this stage is again, there's a panel here of government people. There's the IDC process that Emily was talking about before. When there are complex cases, you can be, as you probably know, you can be sure that agencies are talking to each other to try and resolve these issues. And I'm familiar, for example, and many of you would be, with foreign investment. So foreign investment is another instance where Australia has identified a need to collaborate with an international partner, but sometimes the foreign investment comes with risk. So how does government provide integrated, how do agencies provide integrated advice to government on making a decision? Now, a lot of the time it is case by case. I can't think of a model for scientific collaboration or international research collaboration that would have a similar kind of thing to FIRB. But I know maybe Tim's got some ideas, but I think we'd be keen to explore something like that, but it doesn't exist yet.
Thanks, Ray. I think the secret might lie in making it thematic, so you do have to curate it in some way. To some extent, AUKUS Pillars 1 and 2 gave us that entree into thinking that way, but it doesn't have to be that way exclusively. But there are national objectives around certain critical technologies, and that might be one of the focus.
Yeah, I think it's a terrific stretch goal. I agree. We've been given this opportunity, let's call it an opportunity, with the new defence export control environment to think. It's already generating great interdepartmental communication. Unfortunately, the research sector is so accustomed to dealing with many funding programs and different rules and legislative frameworks. Our Academy's estimated there are 15 different portfolios that science and research covers, and about 200 programs, and most researchers in the country would have to have navigated some of those or many of those. And it's messy, it's fragmented, and it leads to inefficiencies. We haven't a solution to that yet, but we do have another opportunity coming up through the R&D strategic examination around creating some efficiencies on the research side, where I think some of these suggestions could be considered. In the UK, they undertook a review of their funding agencies and established UK Research and Innovation, UKRI, as an overarching funding kind of architectural body to remove some of that duplication, although the funding agencies were able to exist within that. I know I'm speaking only about a funding perspective, but it is often the first entry point where questions are asked around defence export control, or increasingly being integrated into that. So we've seen that sort of thing with the Global Science and Technology Diplomacy Fund, where there are questions right up at the beginning, are you compliant with, or are you aware of? I think we're seeing it introduced into ARC applications, and I wanted to ask Nick if the NHMRC application process from a user perspective triggers that sort of questioning. So I think there are some efficiencies that could be found across the system and across departments, at least through a funding lens that enables a more streamlined approach, or that not quite the one front door across all of the security legislation, but taking steps towards that.
Yeah, thanks. Just so to answer, I guess, that specific question, no, the NHMRC process at the moment does not take that into consideration for applicants, and would be interested to see what the ARC's lessons have been in that. But the broader point around the experience in the UK is one that we're following closely. One element actually, and coming back to our strategic objectives, is around the need for greater commercialisation and seeing the outputs of research having an economic benefit to Australia is something that we would like to see greater emphasise, and I just note that that was a key feature coming out of those reforms in the UK that we've also been following closely.
Thank you. One last call for questions. We've got 1 minute left. Online, yes, let's go to the online audience. Alex.
Some questions from unnamed records. So first one is, how are the countries for opportunities in foreign policy identified, and what linkage considerations are there for countries not included in the foreign country list?
Emily.
I would say from a defence policy perspective, we would like to see more engagement and collaboration with the US and the UK. We've got this licence-free environment. We're doing a lot with the US and the UK, but we want to do more. We don't have a ban on defence export control, so we don't have countries that are banned, or we don't have technologies that are banned. It's on a case-by-case basis. So we allow and support exports to non-FCL countries. That's through the permit system. But I think it's just important to remind everyone that, especially reflecting on the conflict in the Middle East, there's a real expectation by Australian people, and I think the Australian government as well, that they want to know where sensitive defence technology is going, who's using it, and what kind of research collaboration is going on in Australia. So we want to provide the ability to support collaboration with different partners, and we understand there are benefits to having relationships and collaborating on certain technologies with certain countries and universities around the world. We don't want to stop that, but we want to be aware of it, and we want to make sure that the guardrails are there. And so that's what the DEC permit process is all about. It's a permissive scheme, it's risk-based, and it's underpinned by our administrative law principles. So we always provide that background, that feedback loop to you. If you don't get a permit, most get permit. We have I think 15 that don't get a permit each year. And we provide that feedback loop to you on the reasons why when we can.
Thank you very much. I might need to wind it up there. We've, I think, exhausted all of our time, and thank you all for your questions and a very rich discussion. Please join me in thanking our panellists. That brings us to the conclusion of today's event. Thank you again for your participation, your engagement. I hope we've been able to share with you some new perspectives and clarify where there's been a need to clarify, and also offer very valuable information about the new export control environment and the systems around it. It certainly is an uncertain world, but it's one where it's ever more vital for us to continue to collaborate, to speak, and to build a thriving system for all of us. I'd like to thank the export control team at Defence. Thank you very much for your engagement on the amendments to the legislation, on the regulations. I mean, one example is the definition of fundamental research enshrined in legislation. We're particularly thankful for that one. But it is an example of when we work together, when legislation and regulations are sector informed, we do end up in a better place, and with interdepartmental committees on the stage at the Shine Dome. So it's terrific to see this sort of engagement across government. As Ivan noted in his opening remarks, as an academy, we will continue to work with decision makers so that we can take a nuanced approach, so all of our joint objectives can be advanced. Finally, I'd like to thank all of our speakers today, Ivan, Nigel, Emily, Rosanna, Tim, Ray, Katie, Chris and Nick. Thank you very much for your contributions and for your time. I know how precious time is these days, so I really do thank you for coming today. To all of the Department of Defence colleagues for their collaboration and their ongoing engagement. And again to the Academy of Science and Defence staff for making today work and pulling it together, in particular Lauren Sullivan and Chantel Farah. Thank you. That concludes today's events. Thank you for joining us, our online participants as well. You are invited, for those in the room, to a light lunch in the Jacob room, and I'll see you in there. Thank you ever so much.
Well done.